There is an old rule among the men who serve in naval special warfare, passed down from class to class at the basic underwater demolition SEAL training facility in Coronado, California. Spoken in the quiet hours between evolutions, when young men with salt-crusted eyes and sand in their lungs sit in the darkness and listen to the voices of those who came before them. The rule is simple. If the water is too still, something is waiting beneath the surface. Lieutenant Ethan Caldwell thought about that rule as he sat in a windowless room on the third floor of the Pentagon 14 months after the night that changed everything. The room smelled of old coffee and government carpet and the particular kind of tension that accumulates in places where people are required to tell the truth under oath. Across the table sat a woman in a dark suit with a digital recorder between them and a legal pad covered in handwriting so small it looked like the work of insects. "Lieutenant Caldwell," she said, "for the record, please state your full name, rank, and unit assignment at the time of the events in question." "Ethan James Caldwell, Lieutenant, United States Navy, assigned to SEAL Team 4, stationed at Forward Operating Base Resolute, Helmand Province, Afghanistan. And you are prepared to provide a complete account of the events of that night, including the actions of Colonel Victor Ashford and the involvement of Blackridge Solutions personnel?" Caldwell looked at the recorder, such a small device to hold such a large truth. "Yes, ma'am, I am." "Then let's begin. Take us back to the beginning." Caldwell closed his eyes. Behind his lids, the darkness was not the darkness of a Pentagon office. It was the darkness of an Afghan valley at 2 in the morning, the darkness of a river that moved without sound, the darkness of a mission that had been designed from the first moment to end in the deaths of 4 American servicemen. It started 72 hours before, he said, at Forward Operating Base Resolute. The base sat in a shallow depression in the Helmand River Valley, surrounded by HESCO barriers and concertina wire, and the constant low hum of generators that powered the lights and communications equipment that kept the outpost connected to the larger war. It was not a large installation. 300 personnel, mostly Marines from the 2nd Battalion, who provided security for the surrounding district, plus a rotating element of Special Operations Forces who used Resolute as a staging point for missions deeper into the province. Caldwell's team occupied a plywood hooch at the eastern edge of the compound, close to the helicopter landing zone and far from the main dining facility, which suited them fine. SEALs preferred their own space. They kept different hours than conventional forces, slept when others were awake, and operated on a rhythm that was dictated not by the base schedule, but by the intelligence cycle and the movements of the enemy. On the afternoon before the mission, and 3 days before the night that would bring everything crashing down, Caldwell sat on his bunk and held his phone at an angle that caught the weak satellite signal that passed for wireless connectivity at Resolute. The screen showed a video call connecting the spinning circle that meant somewhere on the other side of the planet, in a small house in Virginia Beach with a yard that needed mowing and a garage full of tools that smelled like motor oil and salt air. A phone was ringing. His father answered on the 4th ring. Master Chief Petty Officer Thomas Caldwell, United States Navy, retired, appeared on the screen with the particular expression of a man who was simultaneously pleased to see his son and worried about why he was calling. Thomas Caldwell was 67 years old, with a face that the ocean had weathered into something resembling carved driftwood and hands that were still strong enough to splice wire rope but had begun to shake when he held his coffee cup in the morning. "Ethan." "Hey, Dad." The conversation was brief and carried the weight of things unsaid that had accumulated between them over years of deployment cycles and homecomings, and the particular distance that grows between a father who has served and a son who is still serving. Thomas Caldwell had spent 30 years in the Navy, the last 15 as a SEAL, and he understood better than anyone the cost of the life his son had chosen. "How much longer on this rotation?" his father asked. 6 weeks, maybe 8. "Come home after this one, Ethan. You've given enough." "I've still got people here who need me, Dad." "There will always be people who need you. The question is whether you'll be alive to help them." They talked for another 3 minutes about nothing important. The weather in Virginia, a leak in the basement that Thomas had fixed himself because he did not trust plumbers, the neighbor's dog that had learned to open the gate latch with its nose, the small domestic details that reminded deployed servicemen that somewhere beyond the wire, life continued in its ordinary and beautiful way. After the call ended, Caldwell sat on his bunk and stared at the plywood wall and thought about his father's hands shaking around the coffee cup. 30 years of service had given Thomas Caldwell a Silver Star, 3 Purple Hearts, two bad knees, tinnitus in both ears, and a tremor that the VA doctor said was related to blast exposure. These were the receipts for a life spent in the service of something larger than oneself. In the hooch next door, Petty Officer First Class Diego Reyes was sitting on an ammunition crate with his phone propped against a water bottle, studying an ultrasound image with the concentrated intensity of a man trying to memorize something he was terrified of forgetting. His wife, Anna, had sent it that morning from Jacksonville, Florida, along with a message that read simply, "Your son says hi." The image showed a grainy profile that looked, to Reyes' untrained eye, like a weather radar picture of a small storm, but it was his storm, his son, due in 4 months. Reyes was 34 years old, born in Bayamon, Puerto Rico, raised in Jacksonville from the age of 6. He was the team's breacher and explosives specialist, a man who understood the chemistry of detonation the way a chef understands the chemistry of cooking, intuitively and precisely, and with a respect for the consequences of getting it wrong. He had been working with Caldwell across 4 deployments, and in that time they had developed the kind of partnership that went beyond professional trust into something that resembled, without ever being spoken aloud, love. He looked up from the ultrasound image when Caldwell walked in. "You talk to your old man?" "Yeah." "He tell you to quit?" "He always tells me to quit." "Smart man." Reyes held up the ultrasound image. "I'm going to need a raise, or at least a bigger hooch." Caldwell looked at the image and felt the particular warmth that came from watching a friend approach something good and permanent in a life that offered very little of either. "Boy or girl?" "Boy. Anna wants to name him after her father. I want to name him something that doesn't sound like an accountant." In the corner of the hooch, Petty Officer Second Class Ryan Holt sat on the floor with his legs crossed and his SR-25 semi-automatic sniper rifle disassembled across a cleaning mat in front of him. The weapon was broken down into its component groups with the precision of a surgical tray, each piece laid out in the exact order it would be reassembled. Holt cleaned his rifle the way some men prayed, with a regularity and a reverence that bordered on ritual. Holt was 32, raised on a cattle ranch outside of Missoula, Montana, where he had learned to shoot before he learned to drive. He was the quietest man Caldwell had ever served with, not in the shy way of people who lacked confidence, but in the deliberate way of a man who had decided long ago that most words were unnecessary. He had completed 6 deployment cycles and earned a reputation as one of the finest precision marksmen in the SEAL community. 18 months earlier, during a nighttime raid on a compound in Wardak Province, Holt had fired a round through a mud brick wall based on thermal imaging that showed a figure holding what appeared to be a weapon. The figure turned out to be a 12-year-old boy holding a wooden stick. The boy survived. The round passed 8 inches from his head. Holt had not hit him. But the margin between justified shoot and catastrophic error had been 8 inches and a wooden stick that looked like an AK-47 on a thermal scope. Holt never spoke about that night, but sometimes in the seconds before he squeezed the trigger, his right hand would develop a tremor so slight that only someone watching through magnification could see it. The tremor lasted exactly 2 seconds. Then it stopped, and the shot went where Holt intended it to go. Caldwell knew about it, and the knowledge sat between the 2 men like a shared secret that required no acknowledgement. The 4th member of the team arrived at the hooch carrying a cardboard box of equipment nearly as large as he was. Petty Officer 3rd Class Tyler Nakata was 26 years old, born in Kailua on the windward side of Oahu, the grandson of a man who had served in the 442nd Regimental Combat Team during World War II and who had instilled in his grandson a sense of duty so deeply rooted that it felt less like obligation and more like identity. Nakata was the team's communications specialist and joint terminal attack controller, responsible for maintaining their links to higher headquarters. This was his 2nd deployment, but his first with Caldwell's team. He set the box down and began unpacking radio equipment with quick, efficient hands. "Lieutenant, I've been running diagnostics on the new comm suite that Colonel Ashford's office sent over. Better encryption, longer range, integrated GPS tracking for the tactical network." Caldwell glanced at the equipment. "When did Ashford order new comms gear?" "The requisition came through 2 weeks ago. His office specifically directed that we use this suite for all upcoming operations." Caldwell noted this without comment. It was unusual for a base commander to personally direct equipment changes for a 4-man SEAL element. He filed the detail in the back of his mind the way he filed all anomalies, as a data point that might mean nothing or might mean everything. What came next was Jack Brennan. Senior Chief Hospital Corpsman Jack Brennan was the senior combat medic assigned to the Special Operations Element at FO Resolute. He was 41 years old, thick through the shoulders, with close-cropped red hair going gray, and the kind of open, trustworthy face that made wounded men believe they were going to survive even when the evidence suggested otherwise. He found Caldwell alone behind the hooch in the fading afternoon light. Brennan approached with the careful casualness of a man who wanted to appear as though he had just happened to walk by, but whose eyes carried the particular weight of someone who had something important to say. "Ethan, you got a minute?" "What's up, Jack?" Brennan looked around to confirm they were alone. Then he spoke lower than the conversation required. "Those casualty reports from the Korengal operation last month, the one Ashford's task force ran. I've been processing the medical documentation, and some of the numbers don't add up. Injuries listed as combat-related that look more like civilian trauma patterns. Body counts that don't match the engagement reports." He paused. "Could be nothing, but I've been doing this for 20 years and my gut says something's off." "What are you telling me, Jack?" "I'm telling you to be careful on your next mission. Pay attention to what doesn't make sense. And I'm telling you that I've started asking questions that might make some people uncomfortable." Before Caldwell could press further, approaching boots on gravel made Brennan straighten and step back. A junior Marine walked past. By the time he had passed, the moment for deeper conversation had evaporated. "Take care of yourself out there," Brennan said, and then he was walking away, his silhouette merging with the long shadows that the setting Afghan sun threw across the HESCO barriers. 24 hours later, Caldwell and his team sat in the Tactical Operations Center and listened to Colonel Victor Ashford brief them on their next mission. Ashford was 54 years old, a Naval Academy graduate with 28 years of service that included combat tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, and a Silver Star for actions during the Battle of Ramadi. He was tall, lean, precise in his movements and his speech, with silver hair cut regulation short and pale gray eyes that assessed everything and revealed nothing. He stood before the digital map display and briefed the mission with organized efficiency. "Gentlemen, intelligence has confirmed the location of a high-value target, Ghulam Farid, senior Taliban commander responsible for coordinating attacks against coalition forces in central Helmand. He is currently sheltering in a small village on the far side of the river, approximately 12 kilometers northeast of this base. Our sources indicate 3 to 4 bodyguards. Your mission is to infiltrate by river, locate Farid, and capture him alive for interrogation." Ashford clicked through satellite images of the target area, a small cluster of stone and mud brick buildings arranged along a central unpaved road. A 2-story structure with what appeared to be a red-painted door, agricultural terraces descending toward the river. It looked like 100 other Afghan villages Caldwell had studied through satellite imagery. "Rules of engagement are standard. Capture is priority. Lethal force authorized only in self-defense. Questions?" Caldwell asked the questions he always asked. Alternate extraction routes, medical evacuation procedures, quick reaction force availability. Ashford answered each one with calm thoroughness. Everything was in order. Everything made sense. There was no reason for concern. And yet, when the briefing ended, Caldwell stood in the hallway and replayed it in his mind. He could not identify a single element that was wrong. But something in the back of his mind, the same instinct that had kept him alive through years of combat, whispered that the water was too still. The night of the mission arrived with clouds that smothered the moon and turned the world into variations of black. The team conducted their final equipment check in the hooch at 2300 hours, each man moving through a ritual that was personal and precise. Caldwell checked his M4 carbine 3 times, magazine seated, optic zeroed, suppressor threaded tight, backup iron sights folded but accessible. He checked his plate carrier, running his fingers over each magazine pouch to confirm by touch that they were loaded and secured. 6 magazines, 180 rounds. He checked his first aid kit, his tourniquet staged on his belt, his radio, his night vision goggles. Each item was a promise that he had done everything within his control to bring his people home alive. Reyes packed his demolition kit with the quiet concentration of a man handling sleeping serpents. 2 blocks of C4 plastic explosive, each wrapped in olive drab packaging and weighing 1.25 pounds. Detonators stored separately in a padded case. 30 meters of detonation cord. A breaching charge pre-assembled for door entry. and slung across his chest the MK-48 machine gun that had been his constant companion through 4 deployments, a belt-fed weapon that could put down 700 rounds per minute, and that Reyes treated with the same affection most men reserve for family pets. Holt assembled his SR-25 with movements so practiced they required no light and no conscious thought. Barrel seated, bolt carrier group installed, charging handle engaged, scope mounted and locked. He loaded 3 20-round magazines of 7.62 NATO match-grade ammunition, each round inspected individually before being pressed into the magazine. These were not factory rounds. They were hand-loaded by a retired Marine armorer in Quantico who understood that at distances beyond 400 meters, the difference between a hit and a miss could be measured in grains of powder charge. Nakata powered up the new communications suite and ran a final connectivity check with Warhorse Base. The satellite link was strong, all frequencies were clear. The green glow of the display reflected off his face as he confirmed signal integrity, and he noted again the faint anomalous transmission he had observed during diagnostics, a low power signal embedded in the carrier wave that did not correspond to any standard communications protocol. He made a mental note to investigate further when the mission was complete. It was probably nothing. New equipment always had quirks. The team departed FOB Resolute at 100 hours in a black inflatable boat launched from a concealed point on the riverbank. Caldwell sat in the bow. Reyes operated the muffled outboard. Holt sat amidships with his SR-25 in a waterproof case. Nakata was in the stern monitoring the communications equipment. They moved across the river in silence. The water beneath them was perfectly flat, undisturbed by wind or current, reflecting nothing because there was nothing to reflect. No moon, no stars, no lights on either bank. The darkness was so complete that Caldwell could not see his own hand unless he held it directly in front of his night vision goggles. The world had been reduced to the green phosphorescent glow of the no-Ds and the faint sound of water parting around the hull. The river smelled of mud and mineral deposits and the cold metallic scent of snowmelt that had traveled hundreds of kilometers from the Hindu Kush before arriving at this crossing point. Fish broke the surface occasionally, small splashes that sounded enormous in the silence, and that made every man's hand tighten briefly on his weapon before the rational brain identified the source. The tension of a night river crossing was not the sharp adrenaline of contact. It was the slow, grinding pressure of vulnerability. On the water, you were exposed. No cover, no concealment, no ability to maneuver. If someone was watching the river with thermal optics, the 4 warm bodies in the boat would light up like candles in a dark room. They reached the far bank at 0158 hours. Reyes killed the motor 50 meters from shore, and they paddled the rest of the way in absolute silence. The boat's hull scraped softly against mud and gravel. They were on the ground in 30 seconds. The boat pulled up onto the bank and concealed beneath camouflage netting in 60 more. The village was 800 meters inland through scrubby trees and dry fields. They moved in a diamond formation, communicating in hand signals, the silent language of men who had practiced this choreography until it was as natural as walking. At the edge of the village, they stopped. Caldwell studied the buildings through his night observation device. 30 structures clustered along a single unpaved road. No lights, no smoke, no sound of any kind. Caldwell had operated in Afghan villages at every hour. He knew their rhythms. Even at 2 in the morning, a village breathed. Dogs barked, livestock shifted, babies cried. This village had no heartbeat. It was not sleeping. It was empty. Holt, take position on that rooftop. Nakata, set up comms at the tree line. Reyes with me. Target building first. They moved into the village like ghosts entering a graveyard. The streets were deserted. Doors stood open on empty rooms, signs of organized departure rather than panicked flight. Furniture arranged neatly. Food stores packed and removed. In one house, Caldwell found a child's sandal beneath a table, left behind in the hurry of evacuation. The leather was still creased from the shape of a small foot. Whoever had worn it had walked out of this village and into the night, guided by someone who knew that this place was about to become dangerous. Caldwell moved through the empty streets and felt the wrongness of it in his gut like a stone. Villages did not evacuate themselves. Someone had warned these people, someone with advanced knowledge of what was coming, and the only people who knew this team was coming were the people who had sent them. The target building had a red-painted door that opened without resistance. The ground floor was unremarkable. Upstairs, the larger bedroom showed recent occupation. An unmade bed, empty water bottles, a prayer rug facing west. But no Fareed, no bodyguards, no weapons. Reyes went to the basement. The stairs were narrow, cut into the stone foundation. At the bottom, partially hidden beneath a canvas tarp, he found something that did not belong in an Afghan village. A United States military radio, ANPRC 117G multiband networking manpack, standard issue for American Special Operations Forces. The casing had been smashed, internal components partially destroyed, but the identification plate was still visible and the model designation unmistakable. Caldwell, you need to see this. Caldwell descended and knelt beside the destroyed radio. He stared at it for a long time. An American military radio hidden in the basement of a target building in a village evacuated before their arrival. Someone from the United States military had been here, and that someone had tried to destroy the evidence. He keyed his tactical radio. Warhorse Base, this is Eagle 1. We have discovered United States military communications equipment at the target location. ANPRC 117G, partially destroyed. Request clarification on any prior operations in this area. The response came after a pause that lasted several seconds too long. Colonel Ashford's voice carried a tightness, a control that was working slightly too hard to sound casual. Eagle 1, disregard the equipment. Focus on primary mission. Continue search for target Fareed. Disregard. Caldwell looked at Reyes. Reyes looked back. Neither man spoke. The same question was forming behind both sets of eyes. What are we really doing here? They exited the building into the empty street. Caldwell was about to order a search of adjacent structures when the night split open. A single rifle shot, sharp and flat and echoing off the stone walls with a clarity that made it impossible to mistake. The round struck the wall less than 6 inches from Caldwell's head, blasting a crater in the stone that sent chips and dust spraying across his face. He dropped flat. Reyes dropped beside him. Contact! Sniper! Caldwell called into his radio. Holt's voice came back from the rooftop, steady and precise as always, but carrying an edge that Caldwell had rarely heard. An edge that meant the sniper had seen something through his scope that fundamentally altered his understanding of the situation. 300 Winchester Magnum. Entry angle from the southeast, approximately 500 meters. A pause that lasted 2 heartbeats. Then, Caldwell, that is not Taliban ammunition. 300 Win Mag is an American sniper round. The words hung in the night air, heavier than the echo of the shot, heavier than the stone dust settling on their uniforms, heavier than the silence of the empty village that had been cleared and prepared to receive them like a trap receives its prey. Someone was shooting at United States Navy SEALs with a United States military sniper rifle, and the only American who was supposed to know they were here was the colonel who had sent them on this mission. The water had been still, and now Caldwell understood why. The echo of that single rifle shot still hung in the air like something alive, like something that refused to die. Caldwell pressed his body flat against the stone wall of the abandoned house and tried to slow his breathing. His mind was doing what it always did under fire. It was sorting information, discarding fear, building a picture of what was real and what was going to get them killed. 300 Win Mag. That was what Holt had said, and Holt did not make mistakes when it came to ammunition. The man had spent half his life listening to the language of rifles, and he could read a bullet's calibers from its sound the way a musician could name a note from across a concert hall. 300 Winchester Magnum was not a Taliban round. Taliban snipers used Dragunov rifles chambered in 7.62 by 54. Pakistani fighters sometimes carried old British Lee Enfields in .303, but 300 Win Mag was the preferred round of American military snipers and a handful of NATO Special Operations units operating in theater. Someone was shooting at them with an American weapon, and that someone had missed Caldwell's head by less than 6 inches. Reyes was crouched behind the low wall to Caldwell's right, his MK-48 machine gun angled toward the tree line to the southeast where the shot had originated. His face was calm, but his jaw was tight. In 12 years of working together across 4 deployments, Caldwell had learned to read Reyes the way a farmer reads weather. That jaw meant Reyes was angry, not scared. Angry was good. Angry kept you sharp. Holt, report, Caldwell said into his radio, keeping his voice just above a whisper. The throat microphone picked up even the quietest speech and transmitted it clearly through their encrypted tactical frequency. Holt's voice came back steady and measured from his elevated position on the flat stone roof of the tallest building in the village. I have eyes on the southeast tree line, 400 meters. I count 4, possibly 5 armed individuals moving along the riverbank in a staggered column. Spacing is approximately 10 meters between each. They are using terrain features for concealment and moving in coordinated bounds. Caldwell processed this. Staggered column with 10-meter spacing and coordinated movement by bounds. That was not the behavior of Taliban irregulars. Taliban fighters moved in loose clusters. They bunched up around corners and broke into chaotic sprints when they advanced under fire. What Holt was describing was textbook infantry small unit tactics taught at professional military schools. Weapons, Caldwell asked? Mixed. I can confirm at least 2 rifles with optics. One appears to be carrying a designated marksman rifle, possibly an SR-25 or similar platform. The others have carbines, all wearing chest rigs with multiple magazine pouches. These people are equipped and trained, Caldwell. This is not local militia. Reyes shifted his position slightly to get a better angle on the tree line. So who the hell are they? Caldwell did not answer because he did not have an answer. Instead, he keyed his radio to the command frequency that connected them back to their forwarded operating base. Warhorse Base? This is Eagle 1. We are taking fire from an unknown element in the southeast tree line, approximately 400 meters from the target village. Hostiles are using American caliber ammunition and displaying professional military tactics. Request updated intelligence on all friendly and hostile forces in our area of operations. Over. The pause that followed was too long. In Caldwell's experience, when you reported contact and asked for intelligence, the response came within seconds. The radio operators at Warhorse Base were professionals. They did not hesitate. They did not pause, unless someone in the command structure was telling them to wait. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15. Finally, Colonel Ashford's voice came through the speaker, and Caldwell noticed immediately that it was Ashford himself responding, not the duty radio operator. A full colonel did not sit on the radio during routine operations. He had staff for that. Eagle 1, this is Warhorse Actual. Understood your contact report. The armed element in your vicinity is likely a local security force operating in the area. They may not be aware of your presence. Avoid engagement if possible and continue primary mission. Locate and secure target Fareed. Acknowledge. Caldwell stared at the radio as if it had spoken in a language he did not recognize. A local security force, using .300 Win Mag ammunition, moving in professional military formations. And the base commander's solution was to ignore them and continue searching for a target that clearly was not in this village. Acknowledged, Warhorse Actual, Caldwell replied, keeping his voice neutral. He had served long enough to know when to push back and when to comply on the radio while making his own decisions on the ground. This was the second kind of moment. He looked at Reyes. Reyes looked back. Neither man needed to speak. The same thought was in both their eyes. Something is very wrong here. Nakata, Caldwell said into the radio, switching to the team internal frequency. Status report. Nakata's voice came back from his position approximately 100 meters to the northwest, where he had set up the team's satellite communications relay beneath a large overhanging tree. Comms are up. SATCOM link is solid. I have connectivity to Warhorse Base and to the Joint Operations Center in Bagram. All channels are clear. Good. Maintain your position and monitor all frequencies. If you hear anything unusual on any band, local or military, I want to know immediately. Copy that, sir. Caldwell turned to Reyes. We need to move. Staying static against the trained element with sniper is a death sentence. I want to work our way toward Nakata's position and consolidate the team. Reyes nodded. What about Holt? Holt stays on overwatch until we're consolidated. He's the only thing keeping those people in the tree line from advancing. Caldwell paused and looked toward the dark shape of the rooftop, where Holt lay invisible behind his rifle. Holt, we're moving to Nakata's position. Keep eyes on those hostiles and report any changes in their movement. If they advance toward the village, you are weapons free. Understood. I will cover your movement. Caldwell and Reyes began moving through the empty village using the technique they had practiced 1,000 times. One man moved while the other watched and covered. Short sprints between points of hard cover. Never crossing open ground without a destination already chosen. Never silhouetting against the sky or against a lit background. They moved like water flowing downhill, finding the path of least resistance through the narrow spaces between stone walls and abandoned animal pens. The village remained absolutely silent. No sounds of life anywhere, not even the scurrying of rats or the flutter of roosting birds disturbed by their movement. Caldwell had operated in enough conflict zones to understand the difference between a sleeping village and an empty one. Sleeping villages breathed. You could feel the presence of human beings even through walls. The rise and fall of collective unconscious life created a subtle vibration that experienced operators learned to sense almost on a cellular level. This village had no breath. It was a corpse. They were halfway to Nakata's position when Holt's voice came through the radio again, and this time there was an edge to it that Caldwell had rarely heard from the sniper. Holt was a man whose pulse barely changed when bullets struck the dirt inches from his face. To hear tension in his voice was like hearing a surgeon say something unexpected during a routine procedure. Caldwell, the hostiles in the tree line have stopped moving. They appear to be setting up a static observation position rather than advancing. And I'm seeing something else. There is movement in the river itself. Something or someone is in the water approximately 200 meters upstream from the village. It is moving against the current close to the far bank. I cannot get a clear visual because of overhanging vegetation, but whatever it is definitely not natural. Caldwell felt something cold move through his chest, combat swimmers. The thought appeared in his mind fully formed, drawn from years of training and briefings on enemy tactics. Combat swimmers, also known as frogmen in the old parlance, were elite operators trained to infiltrate through waterways using closed-circuit breathing apparatus that produced no bubbles. They could move through rivers and coastal waters virtually undetected, approaching targets from directions that most defenders considered safe. Navy SEALs themselves were trained in these exact techniques. Caldwell knew intimately how effective a skilled combat swimmer could be. He also knew that this capability was not common among Taliban or insurgent forces in Afghanistan. It required expensive equipment, extensive training, and a level of organizational sophistication that went far beyond what local fighters possessed. "Can you track it?" Caldwell asked. "Negative. It's moved under the tree canopy along the far bank. I've lost visual." Caldwell quickened his pace toward Nakata's position. The combat swimmer, if that was indeed what they were dealing with, could be heading anywhere along the riverbank. But the most logical target for a waterborne infiltrator would be something valuable and isolated. Something exactly like a lone communications specialist sitting by a river with his attention focused on radio equipment. "Nakata, listen to me carefully. There may be a hostile element approaching your position from the river. I need you to maintain awareness of your surroundings, particularly your 6 o'clock and anything coming from the water. Do you understand?" "Copy, sir. Watching my 6. But even as Nakata acknowledged, Caldwell could hear it in the younger man's voice. The slight quickening of breath. The tiny tremor that came not from incompetence, but from the simple biological reality of being 26 years old on your second deployment, sitting alone in the dark, and being told that something was coming for you from the water. Caldwell pushed harder through the last stretch of open ground between the village perimeter and Nakata's position. Reyes was right behind him, the heavy machine gun held ready across his chest. They were 50 meters away when Nakata's voice came through the radio again, and this time it was different. This time it carried the electric quality of genuine alarm. "Sir, I'm picking up something strange on the radio. The new equipment, the upgraded unit that Colonel Ashford ordered us to carry. It's emitting some kind of signal, not on any of our standard frequencies. It looks like a locator beacon, a continuous low-power transmission that would be invisible unless you were specifically scanning for it." Caldwell stopped running. A locator beacon, hidden in equipment that Ashford had personally ordered them to carry. A beacon that would broadcast their exact position to anyone with the right receiver. "Can you disable it?" Caldwell asked. "I'm trying, but it's integrated into the main circuit board. If I pull it, I lose all satellite connectivity." "Sir, there's more. I've been monitoring the military frequencies like you ordered, and I picked up a burst transmission on an encrypted channel. I couldn't decode it, but the signal origin was from our side of the border, from Warhorse Base." Reyes grabbed Caldwell's arm. Both men had stopped in a shallow depression about 40 meters from Nakata's tree. "Caldwell," Reyes whispered, "the beacon, the empty village, the professional shooters. This whole thing was a setup." Caldwell wanted to argue. He wanted to find another explanation because the alternative meant that their own commanding officer, a man who had shaken their hands and wished them luck before they boarded the helicopter, had deliberately sent them into a kill zone. But the evidence was building like water behind a dam, and Caldwell could feel the pressure of it pushing against everything he had believed about the chain of command. Nakata, shut down that beacon. Rip it out if you have to. We'll use the backup radio for comms. Roger, sir. Give me 30 seconds. Those 30 seconds lasted forever. Caldwell and Reyes covered the open ground between their position and Nakata's tree, weapons up and scanning in every direction. The night seemed to press in closer around them. The stars above were cold and indifferent. Somewhere to the southeast, the armed element in the tree line waited with unknown intentions. Somewhere in the river, something that might be a combat swimmer moved through black water toward an objective that Caldwell could not yet see. They were 20 meters from the tree when they heard it. The sound was brief and violent. A splash followed immediately by the dull thud of a body hitting the ground, and then the sharp crack of breaking plastic that could only be electronic equipment being destroyed. Then Nakata's voice, high and tight with shock and adrenaline, cutting through the radio for exactly 2 seconds before the transmission died. Contact! Someone from the river! Then nothing. Caldwell sprinted, all tactical caution abandoned. He ran the last 20 meters with his rifle up and his heart hammering so hard he could hear it in his ears. Reyes was beside him, stride for stride, the MK-48 coming up to his shoulder. They reached the tree and found chaos. Nakata's satellite communications array was scattered across the ground in pieces. The main radio unit had been smashed with what appeared to be deliberate precision. Not random destruction, but targeted elimination of their communication capability. Cables had been cut. The backup battery had been ripped free. Even the small handheld emergency radio that Nakata kept in his vest pocket had been crushed. In the dirt, Caldwell could see the marks of a violent struggle. Boot prints overlapping with the smooth impressions of neoprene dive boots. Drag marks leading from the base of the tree toward the riverbank, cutting through soft earth and flattening the grass in a path that told a clear story. Someone had come from the water, overwhelmed Nakata, destroyed his equipment, and dragged him back toward the river. Caldwell followed the drag marks to the edge of the bank. The river was 4 feet below, its surface dark and moving with a slow current that caught the faintest glimmer of starlight. On the muddy shelf at the water's edge, he found something that stopped his breath. Nakata's boots, both of them, placed neatly side by side on the bank as if someone had carefully removed them and set them down with deliberate precision. This was not the action of a panicked attacker. This was someone calm enough, professional enough, and psychologically controlled enough to take the time to remove a prisoner's footwear before entering the water. Boots were heavy when wet. They slowed a swimmer down. Whoever had taken Nakata understood water operations at an expert level and had taken the extra seconds to optimize their movement even while conducting a hostile extraction under time pressure. Reyes knelt beside the boots and looked up at Caldwell. In the darkness, his face was a collection of shadows and hard angles. This was professional, Caldwell. This was not some insurgent getting lucky. This was an operator. Caldwell stared at the dark water. Somewhere beneath that surface or along one of the banks, Nakata was being held by someone with training equivalent to their own. A 26-year-old kid from Hawaii who had shown Caldwell pictures of his mother's garden in Kailua just 3 days ago, who had asked too many questions during the briefing because he cared about doing his job right, who carried a small wooden tiki figure in his breast pocket that his grandfather had carved for him. "Holt," Caldwell said into his radio, grateful that at least their personal tactical radios still functioned independently of the destroyed SATCOM array. "Nakata has been taken. Hostile combat swimmer extraction toward the river. I need eyes on the water. Already scanning. I see disturbance in the water approximately 50 meters upstream, close to the near bank. 2 shapes. One is being towed. They're moving slowly against the current. Can you take a shot?" The pause before Holt's answer told Caldwell everything. "Negative, they are too close together. I cannot distinguish combatant from friendly at this range in these light conditions. If I shoot and hit Nakata..." Holt did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. The image was clear enough without words. Caldwell grabbed the pieces of Nakata's destroyed equipment and began sorting through them rapidly, looking for anything salvageable. Most of it was beyond repair. The main radio was shattered, the SATCOM antenna was bent in half, and the encryption module had been physically crushed. But among the debris, Reyes found something that changed everything. "Caldwell, look at this." Reyes held up the radio's main battery compartment. It had been cracked open during the struggle, And from inside the housing, partially dislodged from a hidden recess that would have been invisible during normal operation, protruded a small black rectangle roughly the size of a thumbnail drive. It was connected to the battery's internal circuit board by two thin wires that were clearly not part of the original manufacturing. Caldwell took the device and held it close to his eyes. Even in the near total darkness, he could see that this was not a standard component. It was an aftermarket addition, professionally installed to be undetectable during routine equipment checks. The wires were soldered with precision. The housing had been carefully cut and resealed to hide the modification. A storage device, Reyes said. Someone hid a memory chip inside Nakata's radio battery. Caldwell turned the small black rectangle over in his fingers. Such a tiny thing, smaller than the last joint of his little finger. But he was beginning to understand that this tiny thing was the reason for everything. The empty village, the fake mission, the locator beacon, the professional soldiers in the tree line, the combat swimmer who had taken Nakata. All of it was about this small piece of silicon and metal. Someone had hidden classified information inside equipment assigned to his team. Nakata had been carrying it for weeks without knowing. And now people were willing to kill to either retrieve it or destroy it. Sir, Reyes had moved back to the riverbank and was listening intently. I hear something. Caldwell moved beside him and strained his ears against the background noise of the river. At first, there was only water, the soft gurgling of current around rocks, the distant splash of something. Maybe a fish, maybe a piece of debris caught in an eddy. Then he heard it. Nakata's voice, weak but unmistakable, coming from somewhere along the bank to the north, partially hidden by the overhang of the eroded riverbank. Help, can't hold on much longer. Caldwell's instinct was to move immediately, to plunge down the bank and into the water and find his man. But a decade of combat experience held him in place like a physical hand on his chest. This was wrong. If the person who had taken Nakata was professional enough to remove his boots and destroy all communications equipment, they were professional enough to use a captive as bait to draw in the rest of the team. Nakata, Caldwell called out, keeping his voice low but carrying. Can you tell me your situation? I'm in the water, under the bank. Someone's here with me. They have a weapon. My hands are zip-tied. Zip ties. Another indicator of a professional operator. Insurgents used rope or strips of cloth. Military and intelligence operatives carried zip ties because they were fast, secure, and compact. Holt, can you see them? Caldwell asked. I have a partial visual on Nakata's position. He appears to be in shallow water under an overhang about 30 meters north of the tree. I can see one other figure, but the angle is bad, too many shadows. I do not have a clean shot. Caldwell made a decision. He began moving along the bank toward Nakata's position, staying low and using the natural terrain for cover. Reyes followed, covering their rear. They had moved perhaps 15 meters when Nakata's voice came again, more urgent. Sir, don't come closer. The person with me said, they said if you come closer, they'll... Nakata's voice was cut off, not by violence, but by a hand placed over his mouth. Caldwell could hear the muffled sounds of the younger man trying to speak through someone's grip. Then a new voice emerged from the shadows beneath the riverbank, and it stopped Caldwell like a wall of ice. It was a woman's voice, American English. Not just American, but educated, confident, and carrying the particular cadence that Caldwell had heard countless times in military briefing rooms. This was a voice accustomed to giving orders and having them followed. Lieutenant Caldwell, I have your communications specialist, and I have no intention of harming him. But I need you to listen to me very carefully because we are all running out of time. Caldwell raised his rifle and aimed it toward the sound of the voice, though he could see nothing beneath the dark overhang. Identify yourself. My name is not important right now. What is important is that you understand why you're here. And I don't mean in this village. I mean why you were really sent on this mission. I was sent to capture a high-value target named Ghulam Farid. The woman's voice carried the ghost of bitter laughter. Farid left this province 8 months ago. He's in Pakistan, and the intelligence community has known that for at least 6 months. The mission brief you received was fabricated. There is no target here. There never was. Caldwell felt Reyes stiffen beside him. The words landed like physical blows, not because they were surprising, but because they confirmed what both men had been slowly, reluctantly suspecting since they found the empty village. If there's no target, then why are we here? Caldwell asked. though part of him already knew the answer. You're here because your team was chosen to transport something without your knowledge. A data storage device hidden inside your communications equipment. The device contains evidence of war crimes committed by American military personnel, specifically the deliberate targeting of a civilian medical facility in Korengal province 4 months ago that killed 58 people, including international medical staff. The river moved past them in the darkness, indifferent to the weight of what was being said above its surface. 58 people. Caldwell had heard about the Korengal incident. Every operator in theater had. A suspected Taliban weapons cache had been targeted in an airstrike, and collateral damage had been significant. The official report had described it as a tragic but unavoidable consequence of combat operations in a complex environment. These things happen in war. They had always happened. But this woman was saying it was not an accident. She was saying it was deliberate. Who ordered it? Caldwell asked. And he hated that he asked because asking meant he was beginning to believe. And believing meant that the foundation of everything he had built his life upon was developing cracks. The commanding officer who authorized the strike, despite knowing the facility was full of civilians, is someone you know very well. He briefed you on this mission personally. He insisted your communications specialist carry a specific piece of equipment. He is currently sitting in the command center at Warhorse Base, monitoring your radio frequency and waiting for confirmation that his problem has been solved. Colonel Victor Ashford. The name formed in Caldwell's mind like smoke taking shape. A man he had served under for 7 months. A man whose service record was impeccable. A man who had received the Silver Star for valor in Iraq and who had been described in fitness reports as one of the finest combat leaders of his generation. You're accusing a decorated colonel of murder and cover-up, Caldwell said flatly. I'm not accusing anyone of anything. The evidence on that device does the accusing. I'm simply trying to ensure it reaches people who will act on it instead of burying it. And who are you? Why should I trust someone who attacked my teammate and is holding him hostage in a river? I had to get your attention, and I had to do it without the people in the tree line seeing me approach. They are not with me. They are a private military contractor team called Black Ridge Solutions, and they were sent here by your colonel for one purpose: to recover that data device and to ensure that no witnesses survived the operation. Caldwell's blood felt like it had been replaced with something cold and heavy. You're saying Ashford sent contractors to kill us. I'm saying that the locator beacon in your radio was transmitting your exact position to Black Ridge's receiver. I'm saying that the empty village and the fabricated mission were designed to get you isolated and far from base. And I'm saying that the Black Ridge team in the tree line has been waiting for you to complete a sweep of the village before moving in to execute what their operations order describes as a cleanup action. Halt! Caldwell said into his radio, his voice harder now than it had been all night. Those people in the tree line, are they still in position? Affirmative. They have established a cordon along the southeast approach. In Caldwell, I'm seeing something new. Vehicle lights. At least 3 vehicles approaching from the north on the access road. No headlights, but I can see infrared markers through my night vision. These vehicles are using military-grade IR identification beacons. From the north. The access road from the north led in one direction, back toward Warhorse Base. The woman beneath the bank spoke again, and this time the calm in her voice had sharpened into urgency. Those vehicles are Black Ridge reinforcements. You now have approximately 10 minutes before they establish a full cordon around this village. After that, no one leaves. Caldwell stood in this darkness between the woman's words and Holt's report. Between the silence of the empty village and the approaching rumble of vehicles he could not yet hear, but knew were coming. He looked down at the small data device he had taken from Nakata's radio. In his palm, it weighed almost nothing, but he was beginning to understand that it carried the weight of 58 lives and possibly the weight of his own team's survival. Nakata, Caldwell called toward the water. Are you injured? No, sir, just wet and scared. Stay scared. It'll keep you alive. Caldwell turned to Reyes. We need Nakata back. We need to consolidate with Holt. And we need to figure out if what this woman is saying is true before those vehicles get here. Reyes had not taken his weapon off the shadows beneath the bank. And if she's lying? If she's lying, we handle it. But Ashford's behavior tonight, the beacon, the empty village, the intel that was wrong from the start. Something stinks, Diego. You know it, and I know it. Reyes was quiet for 3 long seconds. Then he nodded once. It was enough. Caldwell looked toward the dark water where the woman held his teammate. I'm going to give you one chance. Release my man. Come out where we can see you. If you're who you say you are, we'll talk. If you're not, you should know that I have a sniper on Overwatch who hasn't missed a shot in 6 years. Silence from the water, then the sound of movement, a zip tie being cut, the splash of someone being released. And then Nakata emerged from beneath the overhang, soaking wet, stumbling up the bank with mud on his face and his hands rubbing his wrists where the ties had cut into his skin. Reyes grabbed him and pulled him to cover, checking him quickly for injuries with practiced hands. I'm okay, Nakata said, his teeth chattering from cold and adrenaline. She didn't hurt me. She kept telling me she wasn't the enemy. Then the woman came out of the water. She moved slowly, hands raised and visible, stepping up the bank with the careful deliberation of someone who understood that a sniper was watching her through crosshairs. She wore a black wetsuit fitted for river operations and carried no visible weapons. As she reached the top of the bank, starlight caught her face for the first time. She was in her early 40s, lean and hard in the way that career military women became when they spent more time in the field than behind desks. Her hair was pulled back tight, and her eyes moved across the team with the quick, assessing gaze of someone who had spent years evaluating threats. My name is Major Rachel Graves, she said, United States Army, Military Intelligence Branch. I am currently operating under sealed orders from the Department of Defense Inspector General's office. The identification is in a waterproof case on my left hip. Your sniper is welcome to confirm the seals and markings through his scope. Caldwell gestured and she slowly reached to her hip and withdrew a clear waterproof pouch containing what appeared to be military identification and a folded document with official letterhead. Holt, can you see the ID she's holding up? A pause while Holt focused his scope. I can see it. Military ID card appears genuine. Standard format, standard materials. The document has what looks like Department of Defense Inspector General seals. I can see a signature, block, and classification markings. It looks real, Caldwell, but I cannot verify authentication from this range. Caldwell took the pouch and examined it himself. The ID showed Major Rachel Graves, Military Intelligence, with a service number and a photo that matched the face in front of him. The document was a memorandum authorizing the bearer to conduct investigations related to suspected violations of the Uniform Code of Military Justice and the Geneva Conventions. It was signed by a name Caldwell did not recognize with a title that read Deputy Inspector General for Investigations. This could be forged, Caldwell said. It could be, but ask yourself this, Lieutenant. If I were the enemy, why would I release your teammate? Why would I come out of the water unarmed? And why would those Black Ridge contractors in the tree line be setting up to kill everyone in this area, including me? Caldwell had no good answer for that. The sound of vehicle engines was now audible, even without Holt's enhanced vantage point. A low rumble coming from the north, growing steadily louder. The Black Ridge reinforcements were perhaps 5 minutes away. Caldwell, Holt said through the radio, and now there was genuine urgency in the sniper's normally unshakable voice. I count 3 vehicles. Up-armored SUVs from the profile. They're approaching on the North Road at speed, and on their tactical frequency, I'm picking up call signs consistent with Black Ridge Solutions operational protocols. They're coordinating an encirclement. Major Graves looked at Caldwell with eyes that held no deception that he could detect, only the flat certainty of someone who had been living with a dangerous truth for too long. You have about 4 minutes to decide, Lieutenant. You can try to call your base for extraction, except your SATCOM is destroyed, and the only person who would answer is the man who sent you here to die. You can try to fight through 18 Black Ridge contractors with 4 men, or you can come with me. I have a boat 300 meters upstream and allies who can get us to a secure location where that evidence in your hand can be transmitted to people who will actually do something about it. Caldwell looked at the tiny device in his palm. He looked at Nakata, wet and shivering but alive. He looked at Reyes, whose jaw was tighter than ever, but whose eyes said, trust your gut. He listened to the growing sound of engines in the distance and the silence of a dead village that had been emptied to become their grave. Then he keyed his radio one final time to the command frequency. Warhorse Base, this is Eagle 1 requesting immediate extraction. We have taken casualties and require air support at grid reference. Ashford's voice came back almost immediately, and for the first time, Caldwell heard something beneath the colonel's practiced calm. It was the sound of a man whose plan was not going the way he expected. It was the sound of controlled panic. Eagle 1, negative on extraction at this time. Maintain your position. The reinforcement element approaching your location will provide support. Stay where you are and wait for them. Stay where you are. Wait for the people coming to kill you. Smile while they tie your hands, and put bullets in the back of your head and write a report that says the Taliban got you. Understood, Warhorse Actual, Caldwell said calmly. Then he switched off the command frequency and looked at his team. We are leaving, now, all of us. Holt, get off that roof and move to Rally Point North. We are extracting by river. He turned to Major Graves. You said 300 meters upstream? She nodded. Then move. You're on point. And Major, if at any time I feel that you are leading my team into a trap, I want you to understand that the last thing you will hear on this earth is the sound of my rifle. Rachel Graves met his eyes without flinching. Fair enough, Lieutenant. Now let's go before those vehicles cut off our only way out. They moved into the darkness along the riverbank, 5 figures plus 1, leaving behind an empty village and the approaching lights of men who had been sent to make sure they never came home. They moved along the riverbank in single file with Rachel Graves on point and Caldwell directly behind her, close enough to put a round between her shoulder blades if she turned out to be something other than what she claimed. Reyes brought up the rear with Nakata between them, the young communications specialist still shivering from his time in the water, but moving under his own power to the stubborn determination that Caldwell had come to recognize as the thing that separated men who survived from men who did not. It was not strength or skill or even courage. It was the simple refusal to stop putting one foot in front of the other when every nerve in your body was screaming at you to curl up and hide. Holt was moving separately, descending from his rooftop overwatch position and working his way north through the village to meet them at the rally point. He moved alone in the darkness the way he always did, silent and patient, a man who had spent so many years becoming invisible that sometimes Caldwell wondered if Holt had forgotten how to be seen. The sound of the approaching vehicles was louder now. Caldwell estimated they were less than 3 minutes from the village perimeter. Once the Black Ridge teams deployed from those vehicles, they would establish a security cordon that would be nearly impossible to penetrate on foot. The clock was not ticking. It was hammering. Rachel Graves moved with a fluidity that confirmed her military background more convincingly than any identification card could. She navigated the uneven riverbank terrain without hesitation, choosing footholds on rocks that would not shift and avoiding soft mud that would leave tracks. Her body stayed low and compact, presenting the smallest possible profile against the sky. Caldwell watched her move and made it a tactical assessment. Major Rachel Graves had spent serious time in hostile territory. The way she checked corners, the way her head moved in constant scan, the way her breathing remained controlled despite the pace. This woman had been in the field, deep and sustained, the kind of operational time that changed the way a person moved through the world. They had covered perhaps 200 meters along the bank when Holt's voice came through the tactical radio, barely above a whisper. I'm at the rally point. I can see your position. Clear ahead for 100 meters. But Caldwell, the vehicles have reached the village. I watched them deploy, 12 personnel minimum from the first 2 vehicles. Third vehicle is hanging back, possibly a command element. They are moving into the village in a professional sweep pattern. 2-man teams clearing buildings, 12 operators sweeping the village, plus the 5 who had been in the tree line from the beginning, plus however many were in the command vehicle, against 5 people and a woman he still was not entirely sure he could trust. How long before they realize we're not in the village, Caldwell asked. Depends on how thorough they are. If they do a full clear of every structure, 20 minutes. If they find our tracks leading to the riverbank first, maybe 5. 5 minutes, maybe 20. Somewhere in that window lay the difference between escape and a firefight that Caldwell's team was not equipped to win. They reached the rally point where Holt waited behind a cluster of boulders deposited along the bank during some long-ago flood season. The sniper had his SR-25 across his lap and his night vision monocular pushed up on his forehead. This is Major Graves, Caldwell said simply, gesturing toward Rachel. Holt studied her for 3 seconds. His eyes moved across her wetsuit, her empty hands, her face. Then he looked at Caldwell and gave the slightest nod, which in Holt's compressed vocabulary of gestures meant I see her. I have assessed her. I will reserve judgment, but I am ready for anything. The boat is another 100 meters upstream, Rachel said, keeping her voice low, hidden in a cutback where the bank has been undercut by flooding. My team cached it there 48 hours ago. Your team, Caldwell repeated. How many people do you have? In this area, just one other. You already encountered him tonight, although you didn't know who he was at the time. She paused and looked at Caldwell with an expression that carried something close to sympathy. The sniper who fired that first shot at the village, the one using .300 Winchester Magnum. Caldwell felt the muscles in his shoulders tighten. That shot had come within inches of killing him. Whoever had fired it was either a very bad shot or had deliberately chosen not to hit him. He wasn't shooting at you, Rachel said, reading his reaction. He was shooting at a tracking device that Blackridge had placed on the roof of the target building. A GPS transponder that was feeding your exact position to their tactical network in real time. Without that shot, Blackridge would have had precision coordinates on your team the moment you entered the building. And who exactly is this sniper of yours? Rachel hesitated for the first time since she had emerged from the river. It was a small hesitation, barely a quarter second, but Caldwell caught it because he had spent his career watching people for exactly these kinds of tells. Whatever she was about to say, it carried weight that she was not certain he was ready to bear. Sergeant First Class Jack Brennan. The name hit Caldwell like a physical blow. He actually took a half-step backward, which was something that had not happened to him under fire in over a decade of combat operations. Jack Brennan, their combat medic at Warhorse Base, the man who had pulled Caldwell aside just hours before this mission and said those strange words about casualty reports that did not add up. The man who had looked at Caldwell with eyes that were trying to communicate something urgent without saying it directly. Brennan is supposed to be at Warhorse Base, Caldwell said, and he could hear the flatness in his own voice, the sound of a man processing information that was rearranging the architecture of his understanding. Brennan left Warhorse Base 12 hours before your mission launched. He discovered that Colonel Ashford had issued a classified operations order to Blackridge Solutions authorizing lethal action against your team following the recovery of the data device. Brennan accessed Ashford's secure terminal while the colonel was in a meeting and saw the order. He copied what he could and disappeared before Ashford realized the breach. Caldwell looked at Reyes. The explosive specialist's face was unreadable in the darkness, but his breathing had changed. It was deeper now, slower, the way a man breathes when he is working to control a rage that wants to consume him. Brennan has been working with me for 3 months, Rachel continued. He's the one who first noticed irregularities in the casualty documentation from the Kringle incident. As a combat medic, he processes the initial medical reports on all casualties in his area of operations. The numbers in the official reports did not match what he saw in the field hospital records. Bodies that were listed as enemy combatants had injuries consistent with civilians. Women, children. People who had no business being anywhere near a weapons cache. So Brennan came to you, Caldwell said. He came to the Inspector General's office through a confidential reporting channel. I was assigned to investigate. What I found was not just one incident, but a pattern. Korengal was the worst, but there were at least 4 other operations where civilian casualties were deliberately misreported to conceal targeting errors or, in some cases, intentional strikes against protected sites. Nakata spoke for the first time since his rescue, and his voice carried the particular quality of a young man whose worldview was cracking along fault lines he had not known existed. Are you saying our own military has been murdering civilians and covering it up? Rachel looked at him with the patience of someone who had already grieved past the shock stage and arrived at cold determination. I am saying that specific individuals within the command structure made decisions that resulted in civilian deaths and that systematically falsified records to avoid accountability. This is not about the military as an institution. This is about people who betrayed everything that institution is supposed to stand for. Caldwell held up the small data device that he had recovered from Nakata's destroyed radio. And this contains the evidence. Video footage from helmet-mounted cameras worn by the operators who conducted the Korengal strike. Audio recordings of the command net during the operation, including Colonel Ashford's direct orders to proceed with the strike despite being informed that the facility was a functioning medical clinic. After action reports, both the real versions and the sanitized versions that were submitted up the chain of command. Communication intercepts showing coordination between Ashford and Blackridge Solutions to eliminate potential witnesses, everything needed to bring charges under the Uniform Code of Military Justice and the War Crimes Act. Caldwell closed his fist around the device. 58 people. He kept coming back to that number. 58 human beings who had been alive 4 months ago, going about the ordinary business of healing and being healed. And then a decision made in an air-conditioned command center had turned them into statistics in a falsified report. Brennan, Caldwell said into his radio on the tactical frequency, "This is Caldwell. If you're on this net, respond." 3 seconds of silence. Then a voice that Caldwell recognized immediately, the voice of the man who had bandaged his cuts and treated his team's injuries for 7 months. The voice that had warned him to be careful just hours ago. "I'm here, Caldwell. Position is approximately 300 meters southeast of your location on the ridge above the tree line. I have observation on the Black Ridge element in the village. They finished the initial sweep, and they know you're not there. 2 teams are now moving toward the riverbank following your tracks." Caldwell processed this instantly. Their head start was evaporating. "How much time do we have?" "At their pace, they'll reach your current position in about 10 minutes. Maybe less if they push it." "And the other Black Ridge element that was in the tree line?" "They've repositioned to the north, probably to cut off escape along the riverbank." "You're being squeezed, Caldwell. Classic hammer and anvil." Rachel was already moving. "The boat? Now, we talk more once we're on the water." They moved the final 100 meters at a pace that bordered on reckless, sacrificing noise discipline for speed, because concealment no longer mattered as much as distance. The riverbank narrowed and steepened, the water below running faster as the channel compressed or between rocky walls that millions of years of erosion had carved from the valley floor. Rachel found the cutback she had described, a deep indentation in the bank where floodwaters had scooped out a natural hollow beneath overhanging tree roots. Inside, covered with a camouflage net that blended perfectly with the surrounding vegetation, was a rigid hull inflatable boat large enough for 8 people, fitted with a muffled outboard engine designed for low acoustic signature operations. Reyes and Holt pulled back the camouflage net while Caldwell helped Nakata down the steep bank to the water's edge. Rachel began her pre-flight checks on the engine with the automatic efficiency of someone who had prepared boats for river extraction more than once. Brennan, Caldwell said into the radio, "We're at the boat. What's your extraction plan?" "I'll make my own way out. I know this terrain. I've been operating in it for 3 months. Focus on getting that device to safety. I'll link up with Major Graves at the alternate rally point in 48 hours. Caldwell did not like it. Leaving a man alone in hostile territory with Black Ridge contractors hunting went against every principle that had been drilled into him since the first day of basic underwater demolition SEAL training at Coronado. You do not leave your people behind. That was not just a motto. It was the covenant that held special operations together. "Brennan, I want you to move to our position and extract with us." "Negative, Caldwell. If I move now, I'll lead them right to you. I'm their best chance of tracking your escape route. If I stay and create a diversion, I can buy you an extra 20 minutes on the river before they even know which direction you went. I'm not leaving you here." Brennan's voice was steady and warm, in the way that only a man who had been caring for other people's bodies and spirits for 20 years could manage. "Ethan, listen to me. I've been running from these people for 12 hours already. I know how to disappear in this valley. I've got supply caches in 3 different locations. I will be fine. What I will not be fine with is watching everything I've risked my career and my life for get captured because you waited too long to leave." There was a sound in the distance. Dogs. The deep baying of working dogs being brought to bear on a scent trail. Black Ridge had K9 units. "Go now," Brennan said, and there was no more discussion in his voice. It was an order delivered from one professional to another. Take care of those men and take care of that evidence. Rachel had the engine running, its modified exhaust producing a low hum that blended with the natural sound of the river. Holt and Reyes were already in the boat. Nakata was seated amidships with his injured wrist cradled against his chest. Caldwell was the last one standing on the bank. He looked southeast toward the ridge where Brennan was hidden somewhere in the darkness. A man who had thrown away his career and quite possibly his life because he had looked at numbers on a page and refused to accept the lie that those numbers told. 48 hours, Brennan. I'm holding you to that. I'll bring beer." Caldwell stepped into the boat and Rachel pushed off from the bank. The current caught them immediately and the engine engaged, pushing them upstream against the flow. The river swallowed them into its darkness, and the village, and the boats, and the men who wanted them dead fell away behind them like a nightmare releasing its grip. For 3 minutes, nobody spoke. The only sounds were the engine's muffled heartbeat and the water parting around the hull. Rachel navigated by memory and by the faintest outlines of the riverbank, keeping the boat in the deepest channel where the current was strongest and any pursuing watercraft would have the hardest time matching their speed. Then Caldwell spoke, and his voice carried the weight of a man who had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. "Tell me everything, from the beginning. Don't leave anything out." Rachel kept her eyes on the river as she talked. Her voice was level and precise, delivering facts the way a surgeon delivers incisions, with economy and purpose and no wasted motion. 4 months ago, a joint special operations task force under Colonel Ashford's command received intelligence that a senior Taliban commander named Mullah Rashid was receiving medical treatment at a facility in the Korangal Valley. The facility was registered with the International Committee of the Red Cross as a civilian medical clinic. It had been operating for 3 years, providing health care to local populations on both sides of the conflict. It treated anyone who walked through the door: farmers with broken bones, women in difficult labor, children with infections, and yes, occasionally wounded fighters from both sides, because that is what medical facilities do under international humanitarian law. She adjusted the boat's course around a large rock that jutted from the water. The engine note changed briefly, then settled. Ashford's intelligence team confirmed that Rashid was in the facility. They also confirmed that the facility was fully operational with approximately 70 civilians inside, including 12 staff members from Doctors Without Borders. Standard procedure in this situation is clear. You monitor the facility, you wait for the target to leave. You conduct the strike in a location that minimizes civilian casualties. This is not just ethics, it is law. It is the law of armed conflict that every officer in the United States military is trained to uphold. Ashford didn't wait, Caldwell said. It was not a question. Ashford decided that Rashid was too valuable a target to risk losing. He ordered an immediate strike. His own intelligence officer, a captain named Torres, objected and formally noted his objection in the operations log. Ashford overruled him and ordered the log entry deleted. Torres refused. Ashford relieved him of duty on the spot and replaced him with a more compliant officer. "What happened to Torres?" Reyes asked from the back of the boat. Captain Torres was transferred to a logistics unit in Kuwait within 48 hours. 3 weeks later, he was killed in what was officially classified as a vehicle accident on a supply route outside Camp Arifjan. The accident investigation was handled by a military police unit that had connections to Black Ridge Solutions. The boat moved through a narrow section of river where the banks closed in and the current accelerated. Rachel throttled back to maintain control. In the compressed space, her words seemed to echo off the rock walls. The strike on the clinic was conducted by a special operations element using precision-guided munitions deployed from a drone aircraft. The drone was controlled from a ground station at Warhorse Base. Ashford was present in the control room and personally authorized weapons release. The strike destroyed the main building and a significant portion of the adjacent structures. 58 people were confirmed dead, including 7 children under the age of 10 and 4 members of the Doctors Without Borders staff. Holt had been silent throughout Rachel's account, sitting in the bow of the boat with his rifle across his knees and his eyes scanning the river ahead. Now he spoke, and his voice was the quietest Caldwell had ever heard it. "The helmet cam footage on that device. It's from the ground assessment team that went in after the strike." Rachel nodded. The battle damage assessment team included 2 operators wearing helmet cameras. Their footage shows clearly that the destroyed facility was a functioning medical clinic at the time of the strike. Hospital beds with patients still in them, medical equipment, medicine storage, and bodies. Bodies of civilians who had no connection to any armed group. The footage is unambiguous. There is no way to watch it and conclude that this was a legitimate military target. "And the cover-up?" Caldwell asked. Ashford classified the footage immediately and restricted access to a handful of officers he trusted. He submitted an after-action report describing the facility as a confirmed Taliban command and control center being used to coordinate attacks against coalition forces. The civilian casualties were attributed to secondary explosions from weapons and ammunition stored in the facility. A narrative was constructed that satisfied the requirements of the chain of command, and because the Korangal Valley was an active combat zone with limited independent access, nobody in a position to challenge the report had the ability to visit the site and see for themselves. Until Brennan noticed the numbers didn't add up, Caldwell said. Brennan processed the casualty documentation because that was his job as the senior combat medic in the area. He noticed that the medical descriptions of the casualties did not match the official narrative. Wounds consistent with blast injuries in people who were lying in hospital beds, not standing at weapons positions. Injuries to women and children in numbers far exceeding what you would expect to find in a military facility. He started asking questions, quiet questions at first. But in a small command structure, quiet questions get noticed. And Ashford noticed. Ashford began monitoring Brennan's communications and discovered that he had contacted the Inspector General's confidential reporting line. That's when Ashford brought in Blackridge. Their initial task was to identify and neutralize the leak. When they traced it to Brennan, Ashford faced a choice. He could try to discredit Brennan, which would be difficult because Brennan's record was exemplary and his medical documentation was meticulous. Or he could make Brennan disappear the way Torres had disappeared. But Brennan got out first, Reyes said, because I warned him. I had been building a case against Ashford for 3 months by that point, using sources inside the intelligence community and accessing classified archives through Inspector General authority. When I learned that Ashford had authorized Blackridge to conduct what their operational documents described as a permanent remediation of the Brennan situation, I contacted Brennan directly and told him to run. Caldwell sat with all of this for a long moment. The boat continued its journey upstream, the engine humming its patient rhythm against the current. Around them, the Afghan night was vast and dark and utterly indifferent to the human drama unfolding on its waters. He thought about Colonel Ashford sitting in the command center at Warhorse Base right now. A man in a clean uniform behind a clean desk, drinking coffee from a mug that probably had some motivational slogan on it, tracking the movements of the people he had sent to be killed. A man who had shaken Caldwell's hand and said good hunting before the mission. A man whose service record showed 28 years of honorable service to the United States of America. Caldwell thought about the photograph he had seen in Ashford's office. The colonel with his wife and 2 teenage daughters at a Navy football game. A family man, a patriot, a murderer. Why us? Caldwell asked. Why my team? There are dozens of units that could have been used to transport that device. Rachel looked at him with an expression that mixed professional assessment with something that might have been respect. Because your team was scheduled for a deployment to the exact area where I could intercept you without Ashford's surveillance network detecting the handoff. Because your communications specialist would be carrying equipment that could hide the device without his knowledge. And because, Lieutenant Caldwell, someone in the Inspector General's office who read your personnel file believed that if things went wrong, you were the type of leader who would make the right decision even when the right decision meant disobeying a direct order from your commanding officer. Caldwell wanted to be angry about that. He wanted to feel used and manipulated, which he was. But the anger would not form completely because beneath it was something else. A recognition that whoever had made that assessment had been correct. Here he was on a boat in the middle of the night in hostile territory, having disobeyed his commanding officer, trusting a woman he had met less than 30 minutes ago because the alternative was to participate in the burial of innocent deaths that deserved to be counted. Nakata, Caldwell said, turning to the young communications specialist. The signal you detected from the radio, the beacon, how long had it been transmitting? Nakata's jaw tightened as he considered the question. His shivering had stopped and his voice was steady when he answered. Based on the signal characteristics, it was designed to activate when the radio was powered on in a specific geographic area, probably geofenced to this region. So it's been transmitting since we turned on our equipment after arriving in country, possibly for the entire 3 weeks we've been operating out of Warhorse Base. 3 weeks. For 3 weeks, Blackridge had known the precise location of Caldwell's team every time they turned on their radio, every patrol, every mission, every movement. They had been tracked like animals wearing radio collars, and they had never known. That means Ashford has been planning this for at least 3 weeks, Holt said, and the quiet fury in his voice was something Caldwell had never heard before. Holt was a man who processed emotion the way his rifle processed ammunition, one controlled round at a time. But this was different. This was a betrayal that struck at the core of everything Holt believed about service and duty and the sacred bond between a commander and the men under his care. Longer than that, Rachel said. The operation to silence the investigation and recover the evidence has been in motion for at least 2 months. Your team was identified as the transport vector 6 weeks ago. The mission to capture Fareed was fabricated 4 weeks ago. The intelligence reports you received were written by a Blackridge analyst, not by military intelligence. Caldwell absorbed this. Every piece of information they had received about this mission, the target identification, the threat assessment, the terrain analysis, all of it had been manufactured. They had been given a script and sent onto a stage where the final act called for their deaths. Sir, Nakata had been fiddling with the small backup radio that he carried in his vest, the only communications equipment that had survived because it was on his person when the combat swimmer attacked rather than with the main array. Now his face had taken on the particular intensity that Caldwell had learned to associate with the young man discovering something important in the electronic spectrum. I've been monitoring the Blackridge tactical frequency that Holt identified earlier. They're not just communicating locally, they're relaying to a satellite uplink. Someone outside the theater is directing this operation in real time. Can you identify the relay endpoint? Rachel asked, and there was a sharpness in her voice that told Caldwell this was new information even for her. I can get a bearing on the uplink signal. It's routing through a commercial satellite provider, not military SATCOM. Whoever is on the other end doesn't want this going through government channels. Rachel exchanged a look with Caldwell that communicated a shared understanding of what this meant. The conspiracy did not end with Ashford. There were people in Washington or elsewhere directing the cover-up from thousands of miles away, people with access to commercial satellite communications and the authority to deploy private military contractors in a combat zone. Can you intercept the content? Caldwell asked. The encryption is commercial grade, not military. Give me 10 minutes with the right equipment and I could crack it. But all I have is this handheld unit. Rachel reached under the boat's center console and pulled out a waterproof case. Inside was a compact signals intelligence kit, not military issue but high-end commercial equipment of the type used by intelligence agencies that needed deniable capability. She handed it to Nakata, and the young man's eyes widened with recognition. This is a Stingray variant, modified for SIGINT collection. Where did you get this? Inspector General's office has access to equipment that doesn't appear in any official inventory. Can you use it? Nakata was already connecting cables with fingers that moved with the precision of a concert pianist, despite the cold and the fear in the rocking of the boat. I can use it. While Nakata worked, Caldwell moved to the bow of the boat where Holt sat watching the river ahead. The two men had served together for 4 years across 3 deployments. They had shared foxholes and firefights and the particular silence that comes after both. They did not need many words. What are you thinking? Caldwell asked. Holt was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his words came slowly, chosen with the same precision he applied to his shooting. I'm thinking about a village in Wardak province. 3 years ago, we received intelligence that a compound was being used as an IED factory. We went in and found a family. Father, mother, 4 kids, no explosives, bad intel. I put a round through the wall 6 inches from a 12-year-old boy before we realized the situation. Nobody was hurt physically, but that boy's face stayed with me. I think about him every time I pick up this rifle. He paused and looked at the dark water passing beneath them. If what this woman is saying is true, then Ashford is everything I was afraid I might become on my worst day. Someone who pulls the trigger on the wrong target and then lies about it to protect himself. Except he didn't do it by accident. He did it on purpose. And then he killed the people who tried to tell the truth. What do you want to do about it? Caldwell asked. Holt turned and looked at his team leader with eyes that held no doubt, no hesitation, and no fear. I want to make sure that device reaches someone who will use it. I want those 58 people to matter. And if Ashford or his contractors try to stop us, I want to put them in the ground. Caldwell nodded. It was enough. Sir, Nakata's voice carried the electric quality of discovery. I cracked the uplink. I'm recording the Blackridge command channel. You need to hear this. The young man held out the small radio unit, and through its speaker came a voice that made the blood in Caldwell's veins slow to a crawl. It was Ashford, not speaking on any military frequency, but on the commercial satellite link that Nakata had intercepted. And he was not speaking to Blackridge contractors. He was speaking to someone whose voice carried the casual authority of a person accustomed to making decisions that shaped the fates of nations. The SEAL team has left the village. We believe they are moving along the river. The data device was not recovered from the communications equipment as planned. The other voice responded with irritation but not panic. Victor, you had one job. Recover the device and sanitize the site. How is it possible that 4 operators evaded your entire Blackridge element? Major Graves is with them. She intercepted the team before we could execute. A long pause, then the other voice again. colder now. This is no longer a containment operation. This is a crisis. If that evidence reaches the Inspector General or the media, it won't just be Korengal. The entire program collapses. Do you understand what that means? Korengal, Wardak, Kunduz, Helmand. Every operation we've run through Blackridge for the past 3 years. Caldwell looked at Rachel. Her face had gone very still. Every operation, she whispered. I knew about 5 incidents. There are more. Ashford's voice continued on the recording. What do you want me to do? Activate the river interdiction team. I want boats on that water within 30 minutes. And Victor, I want to be very clear about this. No survivors. Not the SEALs, not Graves, not anyone. This ends tonight, and it ends permanently. The recording continued to play, but Caldwell had heard enough. He looked at his team, gathered in the small boat on a dark river in a country that was not their own. Reyes, with his jaw set like granite and his hand on the machine gun that had seen him through 4 deployments. Holt with his rifle and his quiet fury, and his refusal to let another innocent person die because someone in authority lied. Nakata with his broken wrists and his clever fingers, and the raw courage of a young man who had been baptized in betrayal and come up fighting. And Rachel Graves, a woman who had sacrificed everything she had built to drag a truth into the light that powerful people wanted to keep buried. They were 6 people on a river in the middle of a war zone, hunted by their own side, carrying evidence of crimes that went far deeper than any of them had imagined. And somewhere behind them, boats were being launched, and men with weapons were being given orders to ensure that none of them saw another sunrise. Caldwell reached down and picked up his rifle from the deck of the boat. He checked the magazine, he checked the chamber, he checked the optic. The actions were automatic, performed 10,000 times across 12 years. But tonight they felt different. Tonight they felt like a man preparing not just his weapon, but his soul for something that would define the rest of his life. Reyes, how much ammunition do we have total? Reyes did a quick inventory. I've got 400 rounds for the .48. You've got 6 magazines for your M4. Holt has 3 magazines for the SR-25. Nakata's got his sidearm with 2 magazines. Major Graves is unarmed. Rachel reached under the console again and produced a Sig Sauer P3-20 in a waterproof holster. Not anymore, 2 magazines. Caldwell did the math. Against a force of 20-plus contractors with vehicle support and possibly helicopter support coming from behind, and now a river interdiction team ahead. The numbers were not good. The numbers were not even close to good. But Caldwell had learned something over the course of his career that the planners and the people behind desks would never understand. Numbers did not win fights. Will won fights. The willingness to do what the enemy did not expect won fights. And the fury of righteous men who had been betrayed won fights most of all. Here is what is going to happen, Caldwell said, and his voice had the quality of forged steel, hard and bright and ringing with certainty. And we are going to get this evidence off this river and into the hands of people who will use it. We are going to do this because 58 people who are dead deserve to have their story told. We are going to do this because a man named Torres was murdered for telling the truth, and a man named Brennan risked everything to finish what Torres started. And we are going to do this because we are United States Navy SEALs, and we do not run, and we do not hide, and we do not let the guilty escape justice, even when the guilty are wearing the same flag on their shoulders that we are. He looked at each of them in turn. Holt, ready. Reyes, let's give them hell. Nakata, the young man straightened despite his injuries, and in his eyes, Caldwell saw something that had not been there at the beginning of this night. It was the look of a boy who had become a man in the space of a few hours, forged by fire and betrayal into something harder and clearer than he had been before. Ready, sir? Major Graves. Rachel looked at Caldwell and for the first time allowed herself a small, grim smile. I've been ready for 4 months. It's about time someone showed up to help. The boat pushed forward through the darkness, upstream against the current, carrying its cargo of 6 people and one tiny device that held the truth about the dead. Behind them, the hunters were gathering. Ahead, the river narrowed and the mountains closed in, and the night grew darker before the dawn. But they were moving, and as long as they were moving, there was hope. And as long as there was hope, the dead would not be forgotten. Caldwell gripped his rifle and watched the dark water ahead. In the silence between the engine's heartbeats, he could almost hear them. 58 voices carried on the current, asking only to be remembered. He intended to be that someone. whatever it cost. The river narrowed. Caldwell felt it before he saw it, the way the current accelerated beneath the hull, and the sound of the water changed from a low murmur to something sharper, more urgent, like the breathing of an animal that knows the hunt is close. Rocky walls rose on either side as the valley compressed into a gorge that Afghan locals called the Throat, a 2-kilometer stretch where the river dropped through a series of rapids that had been carving stone since before human beings first walked this land. Rachel Graves throttled back the engine and studied the water ahead with an intensity that told Caldwell she had navigated this section before but never enjoyed it. The starlight was fading now as clouds moved in from the west, thick and low, promising the kind of darkness that erased the boundary between earth and sky. In 20 minutes, there would be no natural light at all. For a boat running without navigation lights on a river full of rocks, this was both a blessing and a curse. The gorge runs for about 2 kilometers, Rachel said, without taking her eyes from the water. After that, the river opens up into a wide floodplain. My safe house is on the far bank about 3 kilometers past the gorge exit. If we can make it through the Throat, we have a straight run to extraction. And if the interdiction team catches us in the gorge? Reyes asked from his position near the stern, where he had braced his MK-48 against the transom mount. Then we fight in a place where boats cannot maneuver and bullets bounce off canyon walls, which is exactly why we need to be through before they reach the entrance. Caldwell looked back down the river behind them. In the darkness, he could see nothing, but that did not mean nothing was there. The intercepted communication had been explicit. Ashford had ordered boats on the water, fast boats with armed crews whose orders were simple and final. No survivors. Nakata, can you still monitor the Black Ridge frequency? Nakata was wedged into the narrow space between 2 equipment cases amidships. The captured signals intelligence kit balanced on his knees and his injured wrists wrapped in strips torn from his undershirt. The pain showed in the tight lines around his eyes, but his fingers moved across the equipment with the deft certainty of a man who spoke the language of electronics the way poets speak in verse. Affirmative. They launched 2 boats from a staging point about 4 kilometers downstream. Fast, rigid inflatables, similar to ours but with more horsepower. At their current speed, they will reach the gorge entrance in approximately 12 minutes. 12 minutes. The gorge was 2 kilometers long. At their current speed against the strengthening current, they would need at least 15 minutes to clear it. The math was simple and the math was terrifying. The Black Ridge boats would enter the gorge while Caldwell's team was still inside it. Can we go faster? Caldwell asked Rachel. I can push the engine harder, but in these rapids, speed kills in more ways than one. Hit a submerged rock at full throttle and this boat folds in half. And if we stop and set up an ambush at the gorge entrance? Rachel shook her head. The walls are too steep to climb and there is no bank to land on for the first 500 meters. If we stop in the gorge, we're trapped between rock walls with no cover and no escape route. Caldwell processed the options. Forward through the gorge was dangerous. Stopping was suicidal. Going back meant running into the pursuing boats. The only variable he could control was how his team used the 12 minutes they had. Reyes. Caldwell turned to his explosives specialist, and even in the darkness, he could see the shift in Reyes' expression as the man anticipated what was coming. They had worked together long enough that Reyes could often predict Caldwell's tactical thinking before the words were spoken. How much C4 do you have left? Reyes patted the demolition pouch on his chest rig. 2 blocks, about 1.5 pounds total, plus detonators and 30 meters of det cord. Is that enough to bring down a rock wall? Reyes looked at the canyon walls rising around them as the boat entered the mouth of the gorge. The rock was layered sandstone and limestone, fractured by millennia of freeze and thaw cycles. Deep cracks ran through the formation like veins in aging skin. An explosives expert looked at rock the way a doctor looked at an X-ray, seeing the weaknesses beneath the surface. I can't bring down the whole wall, but if I place charges in the right fracture lines, I can drop enough debris to block the channel. Maybe not permanently, but enough to force boats to stop or navigate around it. That would buy us time. How long to set the charges? 5 minutes if I can find the right spot. But I need to be on the rock, not on a boat. I need to climb. Caldwell looked up at the gorge walls. In the growing darkness, they were massive shadows rising 30 feet above the water, wet with spray, and covered in the slick algae that grew wherever water and stone met in this climate. Climbing them in full gear without ropes or protection was the kind of activity that safety instructors at BUD/S used as examples of what not to do. Diego. Caldwell used Reyes's first name, which he almost never did during operations. It was a signal between them, a way of saying that what came next was beyond the normal boundaries of duty and into the territory of personal sacrifice. I'm asking you to climb a wet cliff in the dark, set charges while a hostile force approaches, blow it, and then find a way to get back to us before the rock falls. Reyes was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Then he smiled, and it was the same smile Caldwell had seen on his face before every dangerous task they had undertaken together over 12 years. It was the smile of a man who had made peace with risk so completely that it no longer registered as fear, but as a kind of dark joy. You had me at climb a wet cliff. Let me pick my spot. Rachel slowed the boat as they moved deeper into the gorge. The walls closed in until the navigable channel was barely 3 boat widths across. The current was powerful here, funneled by the narrow passage into a rushing force that made the engine strain. Spray from small rapids soaked everyone aboard, and the sound of water echoed off the stone walls in a continuous roar that made conversation difficult. Reyes studied the walls as they passed, his trained eyes scanning for the combination of features he needed. Accessible fracture lines deep enough to seat a charge. Rock composition brittle enough to shatter. Geometry that would direct the collapse inward toward the channel rather than outward and away. He found his spot about 600 meters into the gorge, where a massive overhang jutted from the left wall like the prow of a stone ship. And beneath it, a network of cracks radiated from a central fault line that ran from the water line to nearly the top of the wall. There, Reyes said, pull alongside that ledge. Rachel maneuvered the boat against the wall where a narrow shelf of rock protruded just above the waterline. Reyes grabbed the ledge and pulled himself out of the boat with the fluid athleticism of a man who had spent thousands of hours on climbing walls and obstacle courses. The demolition pouch hung from his chest, and his MK-48 was slung across his back. He carried the machine gun because Reyes never went anywhere without it. Not because he expected to shoot from a cliff face, but because it was part of him the way his hands were part of him. Keep moving through the gorge, Reyes said, already probing the rock face for handholds. I'll set the charges on a timed detonator. 60 seconds should give you enough distance. When it blows, do not stop. No matter what you hear behind you, keep going. Caldwell gripped Reyes's forearm for a moment. No words passed between them. 12 years of partnership communicated everything. Come back alive, I will. Take care of your wife and that baby. That is exactly what I plan to do. Then Reyes was climbing, his fingers finding holds in the wet stone with an instinct that defied the darkness. Water ran down the stone and over his hands, but he climbed with the steady purpose of a man who understood that the lives of 5 people depended on the precision of his work in the next 5 minutes. Rachel pushed the boat away from the wall and the current caught them again, pulling them deeper into the gorge. Caldwell watched Reyes' dark shape grow smaller against the darker stone until he could no longer distinguish man from mountain. He's one of the best I've ever seen, Rachel said quietly, and Caldwell heard in her voice the respect of one professional recognizing excellence in another. He's the best I've ever served with, Caldwell replied simply. They pushed through the gorge. Rachel navigated by sound and by feel, reading the water's behavior to identify safe channels between submerged rocks. Twice the hull scraped against stone with a sound that made everyone aboard hold their breath. But the rigid inflatable was built for exactly this kind of punishment and held together. Holt sat in the bow, his rifle wrapped in a waterproof cover to protect the optics from spray. His night vision monocular was down over one eye, scanning ahead for obstacles and threats. He said nothing, but his right hand rested on the rifle's grip with the patient readiness of a man who could transition from observation to engagement in less than a second. Nakata, status on the pursuit boats, Caldwell called over the noise of the rapids. They've reached the gorge entrance. Both boats are entering. Speed reduced due to the narrow channel, but they're still faster than us. Estimated contact in 8 minutes. 8 minutes. Reyes needed 5 to set charges, plus 60 seconds for the timer. If Reyes was fast enough and the charges worked, the pursuing boats would hit a wall of debris less than a minute after the explosion. If Reyes was not fast enough, or if the charges failed to bring down sufficient rock, then 8 minutes from now, Caldwell's team would be fighting for their lives in a stone corridor with no room to maneuver. The minutes passed with agonizing slowness. Each second stretched like wire being drawn through a die, thinner and more taut until it seemed impossible that time could sustain the tension without snapping. Caldwell counted in his head the way he had been trained, maintaining a running clock that gave him a framework against the chaos. At the 4-minute mark, Nakata reported that the pursuit boats had slowed significantly. The gorge was working against them too. The narrow channel and rough water forced them to reduce speed or risk the same hull damage that threatened Caldwell's boat. At the 5-minute mark, Reyes's voice crackled through the tactical radio, barely audible over the sound of water and stone. Charges set, timer running, 60 seconds. I'm moving to high ground. Caldwell felt a surge of relief followed immediately by a new fear. Moving to high ground meant Reyes was climbing higher up the cliff face to get above the blast zone. If his charges worked as intended and dropped the overhang into the channel, the debris field would be enormous. Rocks the size of automobiles crashing into the water with enough force to swamp any boat within 50 meters. Reyes needed to be well above that impact zone, and he needed to be above it in 60 seconds. Rachel, maximum speed, now. Rachel opened the throttle and the engine screamed. The boat leaped forward through the rapids, hull slamming against waves and spray exploding over the bow in sheets that blinded everyone for half seconds at a time. Holt braced himself against the gunwale and kept his scope on the water behind them, searching through the darkness and spray for the first sign of pursuing lights. 40 seconds. The boat struck a submerged rock with a jarring impact that threw Nakata sideways and sent the signals intelligence kit sliding across the deck. Caldwell caught the equipment with one hand and Nakata with the other, hauling the young man back into position. The hull groaned but did not breach. 30 seconds. I see lights behind us, Holt reported from the bow. 2 sources, approximately 400 meters back. They're using infrared spotlights visible through night vision. 20 seconds. Caldwell gripped the boat's rail and counted. He thought about Reyes climbing in the darkness, fingers gripping wet stone, the weight of the Mk-48 pulling at his back, racing against a timer that he himself had set. He thought about Reyes's wife Anna in Jacksonville, 6 months pregnant, probably sleeping right now in their small apartment near the base, unaware that her husband was climbing a cliff in Afghanistan with a bomb about to go off below him. 10 seconds. Everyone brace, Caldwell commanded. 5 seconds. 4, 3. The explosion was not the sharp crack of a bomb going off. It was something deeper and more primal, a sound that seemed to come from inside the earth itself. The initial detonation of the C4 was almost lost in the immediate secondary thunder of stone breaking loose from stone. The overhang that had jutted from the gorge wall for 10,000 years separated from its foundation in a single catastrophic moment, and the weight of it, of limestone and sandstone, fell into the river channel with an impact that sent a shockwave through the water that Caldwell felt in his chest even from 300 meters away. The sound that followed was biblical. A roaring, grinding, splashing cacophony of rock hitting water and rock hitting rock and water surging up and over and around the sudden dam of debris that now blocked the gorge channel. A wave generated by the impact raced up the river and caught their boat from behind, lifting the stern and surfing them forward for 30 meters before the energy dissipated. Then came the dust, a cloud of pulverized stone that rolled down the gorge like fog, reducing visibility to zero and filling the air with a gritty chalk that coated their skin and stung their eyes. "Reyes, report!" Caldwell called into the radio. His voice was urgent but controlled because panic was a luxury that leaders could not afford. Silence. "Diego, report!" More silence. And in that silence, Caldwell felt something he had not felt since his first deployment, when a friend had gone down in a firefight and the radio had gone quiet in exactly this way. Then, through the static and the sound of settling rock and rushing water, Reyes's voice emerged like a man surfacing from deep water. He was breathing hard and his words came between gasps, but he was alive, and that was everything. Charges worked. The overhang came down clean, channel is blocked. I'm on a ledge about 20 meters above the river. I can see the debris field. Nothing is getting through that for at least an hour. Caldwell closed his eyes for 1 second of relief, 1 second of gratitude. Then he opened them and went back to work. "Can you get down from there?" "Not the way I went up. The blast changed the rock face. I need to traverse east and find another route down. It's going to take time." "How much time?" Reyes paused and Caldwell could hear him assessing his situation. The scrape of boots on stone, the careful testing of a handhold. "Maybe 30 minutes, maybe more. The rock is unstable, and I don't want to rush and bring more of it down on my own head. 30 minutes. In 30 minutes, Caldwell's boat could be at the safe house. But Reyes would still be on a cliff in a gorge with a Black Ridge team on the other side of the debris pile, and once they realized they could not get through by water, they would look for ways to go over or around. "We'll wait for you at the gorge exit," Caldwell said. "Negative, Caldwell. Get that device to the safe house. I did not climb a cliff and blow up a mountain so you could sit in a boat and wait for me. I'll make my own way. I've got the MK-48 400 rounds and 12 years of experience making it home alive. Go." It was the second time tonight that one of his men had told Caldwell to leave them behind. First Brennan, now Reyes. And both times the logic was sound even as the morality was agonizing. The data device in Caldwell's pocket was bigger than any single person. It represented the truth about 58 deaths and, based on what they had intercepted from Ashford's satellite communication, potentially hundreds more. Getting that truth to safety was the mission now. Everything else, including the lives of the men carrying it, was subordinate. Caldwell hated it. He hated it with every fiber of his being. But he was not a man who flinched from hard truths, even truths that cut like glass. 30 minutes, Diego, then I'm coming back for you. I'll be down in 20. Now get out of here. Rachel pushed the throttle forward, and the boat surged away from the debris cloud toward the end of the gorge. Behind them, the block channel settled into an uneasy silence, broken only by the sound of water finding new paths through the fallen rock. Somewhere in the darkness above that chaos, Diego Reyes clung to a cliff face and began the slow and dangerous business of finding his way down. The gorge opened suddenly, the walls falling away on either side like curtains being drawn back, and the river spread out into a wide floodplain that reflected the last traces of starlight in a broad silver sheet. After the claustrophobic compression of the canyon, the open space felt almost shocking. Caldwell could see for hundreds of meters in every direction, and for the first time in hours, the horizon was visible as a dark line where the mountains met the Skitigwe. 3 kilometers to the safe house, Rachel said, adjusting course toward the far bank. 12 minutes at this speed. Holt had not spoken since before the explosion. He sat in the bow like a figure carved from dark stone, scanning the open water and the banks with the slow, methodical sweep that was as natural to him as breathing. Now he spoke, and what he said made Caldwell's blood go cold. "Contact, 2 o'clock, approximately 600 meters. Surface craft, moving at speed, no lights." Caldwell looked where Holt was pointing and saw it, a dark shape on the water, barely visible but moving fast, throwing a wake that caught the faintest light. A third boat, not from behind them but from ahead. Blackridge had positioned an interdiction team on the floodplain, anticipating that Caldwell's team might make it through the gorge. "There's a second one," Holt added calmly. 4 o'clock, 800 meters. They're running a pincer formation to cut off our approach to the far bank. 2 boats ahead, both faster than theirs, both crewed by professionals with orders to kill, and behind them a blocked gorge with more enemies working to find a way around or through. Rachel cursed softly and adjusted course, angling the boat toward the center of the river where the current was fastest. They must have had crews pre-positioned at a forward staging area. Ashford planned for the possibility that we'd get through the gorge. "Ashford plans for everything," Caldwell said grimly. "That's why he's a colonel." Nakata had the signals intelligence kit active and was monitoring the Black Ridge tactical net with an intensity that blocked out everything else. "Both boats are coordinating their approach. They plan to converge on our position from 2 sides and force us towards the near bank where a ground team is waiting. They've got our course plotted." "Of course they do," Caldwell said. "We're the only boat on this river. In open water, we can't hide." Rachel looked at Caldwell, and in her eyes he saw something that he had not seen before. Not fear, not despair, but the particular calculation of a woman who had been cornered before and found her way out through sheer will and dangerous creativity. "There is one thing they don't expect," she said slowly. "This boat has a feature that standard rigid inflatables don't have. I had it modified for exactly this kind of situation." She reached under the console and pulled a lever that Caldwell had not noticed. The engine sound changed. The outboard tilted upward, and a new vibration began beneath the hull, deep and powerful. Waterjet auxiliary drive, shallower draft, more maneuver capability, and about 20% more speed than they're expecting. The boat lunged forward with an acceleration that pushed everyone back. The water jet drive churned the river behind them into white foam as Rachel aimed the boat directly at the narrow gap between the two converging Black Ridge craft. "You're going between them?" Caldwell asked, not quite believing it. "They expect us to run. They don't expect us to charge." Holt moved without being told. He pulled the waterproof cover from his SR-25 and braced the rifle against the bow rail. His body absorbed the motion of the speeding boat, with the unconscious fluidity of a man who had fired from moving platforms dozens of times. Through his scope, the approaching Black Ridge boats resolved from dark shapes into detailed targets with men visible on their decks. Right boat has 4 personnel, left boat has 3, both have mounted weapons. Looks like M240 machine guns on bow mounts. Mounted machine guns. Belt-fed 7.62mm weapons capable of shredding their inflatable hull in seconds. If either boat got a clean firing solution, this fight would be over before it began. "Holt, I need those gunners down before they open fire. I need 30 seconds of straight-line approach to make these shots." "You'll have 20. Make it work." Holt settled behind his rifle and became something else. Not a man on a boat, but a system of bone and muscle and glass aligned toward a single purpose. His breathing slowed. His heartbeat dropped. The boat's motion became a rhythm that he compensated for through adjustments so subtle they were invisible. He fired. The crack of the SR-25 cut through the sound of the engine and the water and the wind. On the right Black Ridge boat, 600 meters away and closing fast, the man behind the bow-mounted machine gun jerked backward and fell away from his weapon. Holt had put a round through his upper chest just below the collarbone, a shot of such difficulty that it would be studied in sniper training programs for years if anyone ever learned of it. He worked the bolt, acquired the second target. The left boat's gunner was scrambling to swing his M240 toward the approaching threat. Holt's second shot took him through the right shoulder, spinning him off the mount and into the water. 2 shots, 2 gunners down, elapsed time 11 seconds. But the Black Ridge crews were not amateurs. They recovered from the initial shock with the speed of trained professionals. Small arms fire began erupting from both boats, muzzle flashes winking in the darkness and like angry orange stars. Bullets struck the water around Caldwell's boat, throwing up geysers that the wind carried back over them in cold spray. Rachel held course. The gap between the 2 Black Ridge boats was narrowing but still passable. At their current speed, they would shoot through it in less than 30 seconds. "Everyone down," Caldwell ordered. Pressing himself below the gunwale, Nakata flattened against the deck, protecting the signal's intelligence kit with his body. Holt remained in position at the bow because a sniper who takes cover is a sniper who cannot shoot, and Holt had made his choice about which risk he preferred. He fired again, and again. Each shot targeted not the men on the boats but their engines. The outboard motors that powered the Black Ridge craft were exposed and vulnerable, and a .308 caliber round delivered to the right location could disable a marine engine instantly. His third shot struck the right boat's outboard cowling, and he saw sparks and fluid spray. The engine coughed. The boat slowed. His fourth shot missed as a wave lifted the bow at the wrong moment. His fifth punched through the left boat's fuel line, and a thin stream of diesel began spraying into the water behind it. Not a kill shot on the engine, but a wound that would become fatal. A boat leaking fuel would eventually starve its engine and stop dead. Then they were through the gap. The 2 Black Ridge boats fell behind as Rachel's water jet drive pushed them forward at a speed the damaged craft could not match. Bullets continued to follow them, but at increasing range, and the accuracy of fire from moving boats against a moving target at 400 meters and growing was poor even for experienced shooters. "Clear," Holt reported, pulling back from his scope for the first time. His face was expressionless, but his hands were perfectly steady. 6 shots fired from a moving boat against moving targets at ranges between 400 and 600 meters. 4 confirmed hits. 2 machine gunners neutralized. 1 engine damaged. 1 fuel line severed. In the silent mathematics of combat, it was the kind of performance that separated extraordinary from merely good. Nakata rose from the deck and checked his equipment. "Black Ridge Command Net is going crazy. They're calling for air support. The gunship that was over the village is being redirected to the floodplain." The helicopter. Caldwell had almost forgotten about the armed helicopter over the village. If that aircraft reached them on open water, no amount of speed or accuracy would save them. "How long until it reaches us?" Caldwell asked. "Based on the last known position over the village, I estimate 6 to 8 minutes. Rachel pointed toward the far bank where Caldwell could just make out the dark shape of tree cover along the shoreline. The safe house is behind that tree line, 2 minutes to shore at this speed. We need to be undercover before that helicopter arrives. 2 minutes, against 6 to 8. For the first time tonight, the math was in their favor. But Caldwell had learned over a long career that favorable math was the universe's way of setting you up for an unfavorable surprise. They crossed the floodplain at maximum speed, the water jet drive carving a white line across the dark water. The far bank grew closer with agonizing slowness, tree shapes resolving from a dark mass into individual trunks and branches. Caldwell could see a wooden dock protruding from the bank, partially hidden by overhanging willows. This was the extraction point. Rachel cut the engine 50 meters from shore and let momentum carry them toward the dock. The sudden silence after hours of engine noise was startling, as if the world had pressed a mute button. Holt jumped onto the dock before the boat had fully stopped and secured the mooring line with quick, practiced movements. Caldwell helped Nakata onto the dock while Rachel gathered essential equipment from the boat. "Leave anything we don't absolutely need," Caldwell ordered. "Light and fast to the safe house." They moved up the bank through the tree cover. A low stone building waited ahead, ordinary looking, but Caldwell spotted the signs of something more. Reinforced windows, a camouflage satellite dish on the roof, deactivated motion sensor lights along the approach path. Rachel approached the door and knocked in a sequence that Caldwell recognized as a coded pattern. 3 knocks, pause, 2 knocks, pause, 1 knock. The door opened and warm light spilled out, controlled to a narrow beam by blackout curtains. The man who opened the door was in his early 50s with the erect posture of career military and the tired eyes of someone carrying a heavy burden for too long. "Major Graves, we've been monitoring your situation. Come in quickly." They entered and the door closed behind them, shutting out the night in the river and the men who hunted them. The interior was larger than the exterior suggested, with a main room that served as a combined operations center and living space. Communication equipment lined one wall, screens displayed satellite imagery and tactical maps, and a secure server rack hummed quietly in the corner. 3 other people were inside. 2 wore military uniforms with insignia that Caldwell recognized as Army and Air Force, both majors. The third was a civilian in a rumpled suit carrying the particular weariness of a government lawyer who had been working around the clock. "Lieutenant Caldwell, I'm Colonel Marcus Webb, Deputy Inspector General for Investigations." The man who had opened the door extended his hand and Caldwell shook it. Webb's grip was firm but not performative. "I've read your file. I know what kind of man you are, and I know what you've been through tonight. With respect, Colonel, you don't know the half of it." Caldwell produced a small data device from his vest. He placed it on the table. "This is what people are killing us for." Webb looked at the device and then at Caldwell and then at Rachel. And in his expression, Caldwell saw the particular gravity of a man who understood that this small piece of electronics was the fulcrum upon which justice would either tip toward truth or collapse into permanent darkness. "Major Graves, did you brief him on the full scope?" "He knows about Korengal, and his team intercepted Ashford's satellite communication. They know it's bigger than one incident." Webb sat down heavily. He suddenly looked every year of his age and then some. "Lieutenant, what I'm about to tell you does not leave this room until the appropriate legal authorities have been formally notified." He paused and looked at each of the SEALs in turn as if taking their measure one final time. "The data on this device documents not 1 but 7 separate incidents over a 3-year period in which American forces under Colonel Ashford's command deliberately targeted protected sites, civilian infrastructure, and in 2 cases, allied Afghan military units that were interfering with Black Ridge operations in the region. Total confirmed civilian deaths across all 7 incidents is 312. 312. The number filled the room like smoke. Caldwell felt it settle into his lungs and his bones. 312 people. Men, women, children, doctors, teachers, farmers, people whose only crime was being in the wrong place when someone in an air-conditioned room decided that their lives were acceptable losses. Holt stood near the wall with his arms crossed over his rifle. His face showed nothing, but his eyes were burning with a cold light that Caldwell had never seen before and hoped he would never see again. Nakata sat in a chair with his wrapped wrists resting on his knees and his head bowed. He was 26 years old, and he was learning that the institution he had sworn to serve with his life had members who treated human lives like entries on a spreadsheet to be deleted when they became inconvenient. "We need to transmit this tonight," Caldwell said. "We have a helicopter inbound, disabled but not destroyed Blackridge boats that will eventually reach this bank, and Ashford himself potentially mobilizing additional assets." Webb nodded. "We've prepared multiple simultaneous transmission packages. FBI Counterterrorism Division, Senate Armed Services Committee, specifically the offices of 3 senators who have been pushing for accountability on civilian casualty reporting, the Department of Justice War Crimes Unit, and 2 news organizations, the Associated Press and the Washington Post, through their secure submission portals. The moment we transmit, it's irreversible," the civilian lawyer added. "Once this evidence is in multiple independent hands, no amount of classification authority or command pressure can suppress it." Nakata looked up from his chair. "I can handle the simultaneous transmission. Multiple encrypted channels, staggered to prevent any single point of interception. Give me 10 minutes to set up." Webb gestured toward the communications equipment, and Nakata moved to it, his injuries forgotten in the focus of doing what he did better than almost anyone in the Navy. Within minutes, his fingers were moving across keyboards, and his eyes were scanning frequency displays, building the digital architecture that would carry the truth from this small room on a riverbank in Afghanistan to the halls of power in Washington. While Nakata worked, Rachel connected the data device to the secure server. The screen filled with file directories, each one labeled with clinical precision. Korengal Medical Facility, 17th April. Wardak Bridge Incident, 3rd June. Kunduz Market Strike, 22nd August. Each name a place. Each date a day when people died. Each file a record of decisions made by men who had forgotten that the uniform they wore carried obligations beyond strategy and convenience. Caldwell opened one file, not because he needed to verify the evidence, but because he felt that he owed it to the dead to look, to witness. The helmet camera footage was grainy and shaking, shot in the immediate aftermath of the Korengal strike. He saw rubble that had been a building, medical equipment crushed under concrete, a stethoscope hanging from a bent rebar like an ornament on a Christmas tree from hell, and bodies. Bodies that were small and still and had no business being in a war zone because they were not warriors. They were patients. They were healers. They were children. He closed the file. He did not need to see more. "Sir," Nakata called from the communication station. "Transmission architecture is ready. I can send on your order." Caldwell looked at Webb. The colonel nodded. "Send it." Nakata pressed a key. On screens across the room, progress bars appeared as encrypted data packets launched across satellite links towards servers in Virginia, Washington, New York, and everywhere else that the truth needed to go. The transmission would take 4 minutes. 4 minutes to change the course of military justice. 4 minutes to ensure that 312 people were not forgotten. At 90 seconds into the transmission, Nakata spoke again, and this time his voice carried the tone that Caldwell had learned to associate with very bad news, delivered by someone too professional to sugarcoat it. "Sir, I'm picking up at the helicopter. It's close, very close, and it's not alone. I'm reading a second aircraft on approach from the east." Through the reinforced windows of the safe house, Caldwell could hear it now. The unmistakable sound of rotors beating the air. Not one helicopter, but 2. Ashford was throwing everything he had at this location. The transmission was at 40% complete. 312 people needed 2 more minutes. "Everyone prepare to defend this position," Caldwell said, and his voice was the voice of a man who had found the hill he was willing to die on. Nothing stops that transmission. Nothing. The sound of the helicopters grew from a distant pulse into a physical presence that Caldwell could feel in his teeth. 2 aircraft approaching from different vectors, their rotors cutting the night air with a particular urgency of machines being pushed to maximum speed by pilots who had been given orders that left no room for hesitation. Through the reinforced windows of the safe house, the darkness outside remained absolute, but darkness was no protection against thermal imaging. To the cameras mounted on those helicopters, every person inside this building was a bright white shape against a cool background, as visible as a lit match in a coal mine. 40%. The transmission progress bar on Nakata's screen crawled forward with a patience that seemed almost cruel given the circumstances. Each percentage point represented thousands of pages of documents, hours of video footage, and the voices of hundreds of people who could no longer speak for themselves. The satellite uplink was operating at maximum bandwidth, but maximum bandwidth through an encrypted channel to multiple simultaneous recipients was not fast. "Nakata, can you speed it up?" Caldwell asked, though he already knew the answer. "Not without dropping encryption or reducing the number of recipients. If I cut encryption, anyone monitoring satellite traffic can intercept and potentially block the transmission. If I reduce recipients, we risk the evidence reaching too few hands to prevent suppression." "Then we hold," Caldwell said. He turned to Colonel Webb. "What defensive capability does this safe house have?" Webb moved to a storage locker against the far wall and opened it. Inside was a modest arsenal: 2 M4 carbines with 6 magazines each, a shotgun, several fragmentation grenades, and a single M72 Law, a lightweight disposable anti-armor rocket launcher that could defeat light vehicles and, in desperate circumstances, discourage a helicopter from getting too close. "We planned for the possibility of discovery," Webb said, "but we planned for a ground assault, not air attack." Caldwell distributed weapons quickly. Holt took 1 M4 and positioned himself at a window facing east, the direction of the nearest helicopter approach. His SR-25 was low on ammunition, but the M4 gave him 30 rounds per magazine and a higher rate of fire than the semi-automatic sniper rifle could sustain. Rachel Graves took the second M4 and moved to the west-facing window. The 2 military officers on Webb's team took up positions at the remaining windows with their sidearms. Caldwell picked up the M72 Law and felt its weight in his hands. 7 pounds of fiberglass tube containing a 66mm rocket. One shot, one chance. Against 2 helicopters, it was like bringing a slingshot to a gunfight. But David had done well enough with a slingshot, and Caldwell had always preferred biblical odds to no odds at all. "Everyone listen," Caldwell said, and his voice filled the room with the calm authority that came not from rank, but from the absolute clarity of a man who has accepted whatever comes next. "Our only mission right now is to protect that transmission until it completes. Everything else is secondary. If those helicopters land troops, we hold them at the perimeter. If they strafe the building, we take cover and pray the walls hold. If I get a shot with the LAW, I take it." Questions? There were none. Every person in the room understood the stakes. They were not fighting for their own lives, although their lives were certainly at risk. They were fighting for a transmission that would carry truth across oceans and continents to the desks of people who had the power to act on it. 312 names that deserved to be more than classified footnotes in a buried report. 52%. The first helicopter arrived. Caldwell heard it swing around the building in a wide orbit, the pilot assessing the target before committing to an approach. Through the east window, Holt tracked the sound with his rifle, waiting for a visual. The helicopter's crew had killed their external lights, but the engine noise was directional enough to follow. "He's circling," Holt reported, "probably scanning with thermal. He knows exactly where we are." The second helicopter's sound grew louder from the west. Rachel tracked it through her window, her M4 shouldered and ready. 2 helicopters meant 2 potential assault vectors. If they deployed troops simultaneously on opposite sides of the building, Caldwell's small force would be stretched impossibly thin. A spotlight blazed to life from the eastern helicopter, illuminating the compound in harsh light. Then a voice boomed from a loudspeaker on the aircraft. "Personnel inside the compound, you are ordered to cease all activities, power down all electronic equipment, and exit with your hands raised. You have 60 seconds to comply." "They won't wait 60 seconds, Rachel said from her window. "That announcement is for their own records, so they can claim they offered surrender before engaging." 58%. Caldwell moved to the door and opened it just enough to see outside. The spotlight from the helicopter swept across the compound, and in its light he could see figures moving at the tree line. Ground troops. They had already deployed, probably repelling from the second helicopter, while the first provided the distraction of the loudspeaker announcement. He counted 4 shapes moving in pairs toward the building from the west. Professional movement, covering fire positions established before advancing. Ground contact west side, 4 personnel advancing through the trees. Rachel opened fire. Her M4 barked 3 times in controlled bursts, and the advancing figures dove for cover behind tree trunks and rocks. She had not hit anyone, but she had established that the building was defended and that approaching it would cost lives. The eastern helicopter responded immediately, not with troops, but with gunfire. The door-mounted machine gun opened up with a sound like a giant zipper being torn open, and bullets stitched across the front wall of the safe house in a line of impacts that sent stone chips and dust spraying into the room. Everyone dropped below the window lines as rounds punched through the upper portions of the walls, shattering equipment and sending sparks from severed electrical conduits. Nakata threw himself over the communications equipment, shielding the server and the satellite uplink with his own body. If that equipment was destroyed, the transmission would stop and everything they had fought for would be lost. "Status!" Caldwell shouted. "Transmission still active," Nakata called back from beneath his protective crouch. 61%. The uplink antenna is on the roof. If they hit that, we're done. The antenna, a small satellite dish mounted on the roof, camouflaged but visible to anyone with thermal imaging. If the helicopter crew realized that the dish was the critical node, a single burst of machine gun fire would sever the connection and strand the evidence in digital limbo between the safe house and its intended recipients. Caldwell did not hesitate. He grabbed the M72 Law, kicked open the door, and stepped outside into the full glare of the helicopter's spotlight. The aircraft was hovering approximately 200 meters to the east, its machine guns still firing in short bursts at the building's upper walls. Caldwell could see the muzzle flash from the door gun and the dark shape of the helicopter behind the blinding light. He had one shot. At 200 meters, the M72 was within effective range, but hitting a hovering helicopter with an unguided rocket was a low-probability shot. The aircraft was oscillating in the slight drift that all helicopters exhibited during hover. Caldwell extended the Law's telescoping tube, armed the weapon, raised it to his shoulder, and waited for the aircraft to drift back towards center. The spotlight found him. He was fully illuminated, a man with a tube on his shoulder that every helicopter pilot recognized as a mortal threat. The machine gun swiveled toward him. He fired. The rocket left the tube with a blast of back pressure that kicked dust and debris behind him in a cone of hot gas. The projectile crossed 200 meters in less than a second, trailing a thin line of smoke that was visible for only a heartbeat before the warhead struck the helicopter's tail boom just forward of the tail rotor assembly. The explosion was not dramatic in the way that movies portrayed it. A flash of light, a sharp crack, and then a section of the tail boom ceased to exist. The tail rotor spun off into the darkness. Without it to counteract torque, the helicopter began to spin. The pilot was good. He managed to auto-rotate into a rough but survivable descent. The helicopter hit the ground 300 meters away, broken and smoking, its spotlight flickering like the last pulse of a dying heart. "Aircraft down," Caldwell said, discarding the spent Law tube and drawing his M4. One more still airborne. The second helicopter had retreated far beyond rifle range. Without ground forces, it was reduced to observation. Its crew could see the compound, but could not stop the satellite dish from doing its work. Rachel was engaging from the west window with disciplined fire that kept the four-man team pinned, but could not stop them permanently. They were using classic fire and maneuver, two men shooting while two moved, then switching roles, closing the distance to the building 10 meters at a time. "Holt west side, support Rachel," Caldwell ordered as he moved back inside. Holt shifted positions without a word, crossing the room in 3 strides and setting up at a window beside Rachel. His first shot from the M4 caught a Blackridge contractor in mid-sprint, dropping him into the dirt. The remaining 3 immediately went to ground and began directing concentrated fire at the windows. 69%. The ground assault intensified. More figures appeared at the tree line, this time from the south. The crew from the downed helicopter had survived and were joining the fight on foot. Caldwell counted at least 6 more, some of them limping, but all of them armed. Combined with the original 4, that made roughly 10 hostile personnel closing on a building defended by 7 people, 2 of whom were not combat specialists. Colonel Webb and his 2 officers were firing from the south-facing windows, their sidearms outranged by the Blackridge rifles but contributing enough volume to slow the advance. The civilian lawyer had taken shelter behind the server rack and was calmly documenting everything on a small voice recorder, creating a legal record with the methodical focus of a man who understood that if they survived, documentation would be as important as ammunition. 73%. A grenade sailed through the west window and bounced across the floor. Rachel saw it first and reacted with the instincts of a woman who had survived 4 combat deployments. She kicked it back toward the window with her boot, and it detonated just outside the wall, shattering the remaining glass and sending fragments into the room but doing no serious damage to anyone inside. "They're getting bolder," Rachel said, blood running from a cut on her cheek where a glass shard had caught her. Another grenade came through the south window. This time it was Webb who reacted, grabbing it and throwing it back through the opening in a single motion that spoke of training decades old but never forgotten. The explosion outside was followed by a scream that told them the grenade had found a target on its return trip. 78%. Caldwell moved between positions, directing fire where it was most needed and conserving ammunition where it was not. The M4 magazines were not infinite and there was no resupply coming. Every round had to count. He directed single-aim shots at muzzle flashes, not trying to kill, but trying to suppress, to make each attacker consider whether the next step forward was worth the risk. Holt was the calm center of the defense. He fired with the measured precision of a metronome, one shot every 3 to 4 seconds, each one aimed and each one either hitting or coming close enough to force the target into cover. The demons that had haunted his trigger finger were silent tonight. The memory of the boy in Wardak province did not intrude on the mechanical process of defending the people beside him. There would be time for ghosts later. Right now there was only the rifle and the target, and the clear moral certainty that the men advancing on this building were trying to destroy the truth about hundreds of murdered civilians. And then, in the way that battles sometimes pivoted on a single unexpected event, the sound of automatic weapons fire erupted from the tree line behind the Blackridge assault team. Not aimed at the building, but aimed at the attackers themselves. Heavy caliber rounds tore through the positions that the contractors had been using for cover, suddenly turning their protected rear into a kill zone. The Blackridge team reacted with shock and confusion, caught between the defenders in the building and this new threat from behind. Several of them turned to face the new direction of fire, exposing themselves to Holt and Rachel, who immediately took advantage. 2 more contractors went down. "Who the hell is that?" one of Webb's officers asked. Through the shattered window, Caldwell could see muzzle flashes in the tree line. At least 2 weapons firing from positions that provided perfect enfilade on the Blackridge ground force. And he could hear a weapon he recognized. The deep, rhythmic hammering of an MK-48 machine gun, firing in long, controlled bursts that swept the enemy positions with devastating effect. Reyes. Caldwell felt his chest expand with something that was too fierce to be called relief, and too joyful to be called mere satisfaction. Diego Reyes had gotten off that cliff. He had made it down the gorge. He had followed the river in the darkness, alone, carrying a 40-pound machine gun, and he had arrived at exactly the moment when his team needed him most. Because that was what Diego Reyes did. That was what he had always done. He showed up. He showed up when it mattered, and when he showed up, he brought the thunder. The Blackridge team broke. Caught in a crossfire between the building and Reyes's position in the trees, their tactical situation became untenable. One by one, they began pulling back, dragging their wounded, abandoning their assault. The firing diminished from a storm to scattered shots to silence. 87%. Reyes's voice came through the tactical radio, breathing hard, but unmistakably alive and unmistakably himself. "Sorry I'm late. Traffic was terrible." Caldwell leaned against the wall and allowed himself 3 seconds of something that felt like it might be hope. "Get in here, Diego." Reyes emerged from the tree line carrying the MK-48 with the barrel still smoking. His clothes were torn from the cliff descent and his face was streaked with rock dust and sweat and river water. He moved through the door and into the room, and when he saw the faces of his team looking at him, he managed the same smile he had given on the cliff. The smile that said, "I am here and I am whole, and nothing in this world can keep me from standing with the people I love." 91%. The second helicopter had retreated to a holding pattern far beyond effective rifle range. Without ground forces to support, it was reduced to observation. Its crew could see the compound. They could report what was happening, but they could not stop the satellite dish on the roof from doing its work. 94%. And then a new sound, not from the sky, but from the ground. The growl of a heavy vehicle approaching on the access road from the east. Headlights appeared through the trees, high and wide, the lights of something larger and more armored than the SUVs that had carried the Blackridge teams. "MRAP," Holt said from the window. "Mine-resistant ambush, protected vehicle. Military, not contractor. And there's someone standing in the turret." Caldwell moved to the window and looked. The MRAP rolled to a stop approximately 100 meters from the building, its engine idling with the deep rumble of a vehicle designed to survive roadside bombs and direct fire. In the turret, illuminated by the vehicle's own running lights, stood a figure in full military uniform. Colonel Victor Ashford had come personally. The colonel stood in the turret with the posture of a man who still believed he was in command of the situation. His uniform was clean and pressed, a contrast to the filth and blood and exhaustion that covered everyone inside the building. He held a handheld radio, and his voice boomed across the distance between the vehicle and the safe house with the practiced projection of an officer who had spent 28 years giving orders and having them obeyed. Lieutenant Caldwell, this has gone far enough. I am ordering you to power down your communications equipment and surrender the data device immediately. Whatever you think you know about classified operations is incomplete and dangerously out of context. You are being manipulated by individuals with their own agenda. 96%. Caldwell stepped outside. He walked toward the MRAP with his rifle slung and his hands visible, not because he was surrendering, but because he wanted Ashford to see his face. He wanted to look into the eyes of the man who had sent him and his team to die, and he wanted Ashford to see what that decision had created. Not a corpse, not a loose end that had been neatly tied, but a man who was still standing and who was about to end everything Ashford had built on lies. Colonel Ashford, Caldwell said when he was close enough to speak without shouting, I've seen the helmet camera footage from Korengal. I've seen the original operations orders. I've heard your voice on the command net ordering the strike on a medical facility full of civilians. Ashford's face was a mask of controlled authority, but Caldwell could see the cracks in it, the slight twitch at the corner of his left eye, the way his jaw muscles flexed beneath the skin, the barely perceptible shift in his weight that came from a body preparing to fight or flee, while the conscious mind was still trying to maintain the appearance of command. Caldwell, you are a good officer. You have served your country with distinction. Do not throw that away based on fabricated evidence from a disgraced intelligence officer and a traitor medic. Jack Brennan is not a traitor. Captain Torres was not a traitor. The 58 people in that clinic were not enemy combatants. And the 312 civilians across 7 operations that you covered up were not acceptable losses. The number hit Ashford visibly. His mask slipped for half a second, and Caldwell saw what was behind it. Not remorse, not guilt, fear. The pure animal fear of a man who realized that the walls he had built to protect himself were coming down and there was nowhere left to hide. You don't understand the bigger picture, Ashford said, and his voice had lost its commanding quality. It was smaller now, the voice of a man negotiating rather than ordering. In war, decisions have to be made that look terrible from the outside, but serve a greater strategic purpose. Every commander in history has faced this. Sometimes the cost of achieving an objective includes casualties that are regrettable but necessary. Children, Colonel, you killed children, and then you killed the people who tried to tell the truth about it. 98%. Caldwell, if that data reaches the public, it won't just destroy me. It will damage the entire military. It will give our enemies propaganda material for decades. Is that what you want? To help the people who are trying to kill American soldiers? Caldwell looked at Ashford for a long moment. He looked at the clean uniform and the polished insignia and the face of a man who had convinced himself that murder could be justified by strategy and that silence was the same as security. And he thought about his father in Virginia, his father who had served 30 years in the Navy and who had taught Ethan one lesson above all others. The uniform does not make the man makes the uniform. And if the man inside the uniform cannot look at what he has done and call it by its true name, then he has no right to wear it. What I want, Colonel, is for 312 people to matter. What I want is for their families to know what happened to them. What I want is for every officer in this military to understand that there are lines you do not cross. And if you cross them, there is no rank high enough and no classification level secret enough to protect you from the consequences. 100%. Inside the building, Nakata's voice carried through the open door with the quiet triumph of a man who had accomplished the most important task of his life. Transmission complete. All packages confirmed received. FBI, Senate Armed Services, DOJ War Crimes Unit, AP Washington Post. It's done. The words reached Ashford, and Caldwell watched the exact moment when the colonel understood that it was over. Not the battle, not the standoff, but the entire architecture of deception that he had built over 3 years. The falsified reports, the silenced witnesses, the unmarked graves. All of it was now in the hands of people who would not look away and could not be ordered to remain silent. Ashford's hand moved toward the sidearm on his hip. Caldwell saw the movement and his own hand went to his rifle, but he did not raise it. He watched Ashford's fingers touch the holster, hesitate, and then fall away. The colonel was many things: murderer, liar, traitor to the oath he had sworn, but he was not a man who would shoot himself in front of witnesses. His vanity would not permit it. Instead, Ashford sat down in the turret of the MRAP. He simply sat down, as if his legs had lost the ability to support the weight of what he had become. He said nothing more. There was nothing more to say. The second helicopter landed 10 minutes later, not to continue the assault. The crew had monitored military frequencies and heard transmissions cascading through Washington. FBI alerts, congressional inquiries. The Black Ridge crew understood that fighting for a client whose operation had just been exposed was not a sound decision. They powered down their weapons and waited. Caldwell stood in front of the safe house and watched the eastern horizon. The sky was changing. The absolute black of deep night was softening along the ridgeline, turning to a shade of gray that held within it the promise of blue. Dawn was coming. The longest night of Ethan Caldwell's life was ending. Reyes sat on the steps of the safe house, cleaning his MK-48 with the automatic movements of a man whose hands knew the work so well that his mind could be elsewhere. His mind was in Jacksonville, Florida, in a small apartment near the base where a woman named Anna was sleeping with her hand on her belly, not knowing how close she had come to raising their child alone. Holt sat against the outer wall with his rifle across his knees and his eyes closed. He was not sleeping. He was sitting in the particular stillness of a man who had found something he thought he had lost. Every shot he had fired tonight had been aimed true, and every shot had served a purpose that he believed in without reservation. The boy in Wardak province was still there in his memory, would always be there. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, the memory did not make his hands shake. The weight had not disappeared. It had been balanced by something. By the knowledge that his skill with a rifle had helped protect the truth about people who could no longer protect themselves. Nakata emerged from the building carrying 2 bottles of water. He handed one to Reyes and kept the other. His wrists were swollen and bruised where the zip ties had cut into them hours ago, and his leg ached where the cold water of the river had stiffened the muscles during his captivity. He was 26 years old. When he had boarded the helicopter at Warhorse Base the previous evening, he had been a communications specialist on his second deployment, eager and confident and certain that he understood how the world worked. That man was gone. The man who stood on the steps of a safe house in the gray light of an Afghan dawn was someone different. Someone who had learned that the world was more complicated and more broken and more worth fighting for than he had ever imagined. Rachel Graves sat alone inside the building, the glow of a computer screen illuminating her face. She was reading the confirmation receipts from each recipient of the transmitted data. FB, I acknowledge receipt at 0347 hours. Senate Armed Services Committee staff confirmed at 0351. AP confirmed at 0355. Each receipt was a small victory, a door that could not be closed again, a witness that could not be silenced. She thought about the cost. Her marriage ended 2 years ago, her career in military intelligence effectively over. The friends who would call her a traitor before the full truth emerged. And she thought about a photograph she carried in the waterproof pouch. A picture taken 3 days before the Korengal strike showing the clinic in full operation. Doctors examining patients. Children drawing pictures with donated crayons. In the background, a woman held an infant who had just been vaccinated. The woman was smiling. Rachel did not know the woman's name. She had tried to find it, but the records had been destroyed along with the clinic. The woman was one of the 58, one of the many who had been erased by a man sitting in an air-conditioned room pressing a button. That woman was why Rachel had given up everything. Not for justice in the abstract, not for principles written in international law books, for a smile and a photograph, for the simple human truth that some things matter more than career and comfort and the quiet complicity of looking away. At 600 hours, 2 Black Hawk helicopters arrived from Bagram carrying FBI agents and military police. Colonel Ashford was taken into custody without resistance, escorted from the MRAP in handcuffs. his face empty of everything except exhaustion. The surviving Black Ridge contractors were detained. Their corporate leadership in Virginia would be served with warrants before the end of the day. Caldwell watched Ashford being led to the helicopter and felt something quieter and sadder than he expected. The weight of knowing that a man who had once served with honor had convinced himself that silence was strength and truth was the enemy. At 7:30 hours, Caldwell was able to make a satellite phone call to the United States. The phone rang 4 times before a voice answered. A voice that was older and rougher than it had been when Caldwell was a boy, but that still carried the bedrock steadiness of a man who had spent 30 years at sea and had never once doubted what the uniform meant. "Dad." "Ethan, where are you? Are you all right?" "I'm in Afghanistan. I'm safe. Something happened tonight that you're going to hear about in the news. I want you to hear it from me first." Caldwell told his father everything: the mission, the betrayal, the evidence, the fight. He told it simply and directly, the way his father had taught him to report, without embellishment or self-pity. Just the facts arranged in order, one after another, like stones laid in a path that led from darkness toward light. When he finished, the line was quiet for a long time. Then his father spoke, and his voice had the quality of a man whose eyes were not dry. "You did right, Ethan. I disobeyed a direct order from my commanding officer. You upheld a higher order, the one you swore when you put on that uniform, the one that says you protect the innocent and you tell the truth even when the truth is ugly and dangerous. That is the only order that matters when all the others have been corrupted." Caldwell leaned against the wall of the safe house and looked at the sky. The sun was fully above the ridge now, painting the valley in shades of gold and amber. The river below shimmered in the morning light, its surface dancing with reflections that made the water look like it was made of moving fire. Somewhere downstream, the gorge that Reyes had sealed with explosives was probably already being explored by curious locals wondering why the river had changed its path overnight. "Dad, you always told me the uniform doesn't make the man." "I remember. You were right, but I learned something else tonight. The man doesn't have to be perfect to make the uniform mean something. He just has to be willing to stand up when it counts." "That's all any of us can do, son. Come home. Soon." 14 months later, Caldwell stood in a federal courtroom in Washington and watched as Colonel Ashford was found guilty on 23 counts, including conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, and violations of the War Crimes Act. Life without parole. He showed no emotion when the verdict was read. 7 other officers were convicted. Black Ridge Solutions was dissolved by court order. Captain Torres was posthumously promoted to major and awarded the Distinguished Service Medal. His name was added to a memorial wall at the Defense Intelligence Agency. Sergeant First Class Jack Brennan made good on his promise. He arrived at the rally point 46 hours later, dehydrated and exhausted but carrying 2 bottles of Afghan beer. He was awarded the Silver Star and returned to duty as a combat medic at Fort Bragg. Petty Officer First Class Diego Reyes retired from the Navy 3 months after returning to the United States. His son was born on a Tuesday morning in November at Naval Hospital, Jacksonville, 7 pounds 4 ounces, healthy and loud. Reyes named the boy Ryan, after the sniper who had held off an army from a rooftop so that the rest of the team could escape. When people asked about the name, Reyes would smile and say it was a family tradition. Petty Officer Second Class Ryan Holt completed 2 more deployments with SEAL Team 4 before accepting a position as a sniper instructor at the Naval Special Warfare Training Facility in Coronado. He never spoke publicly about the events of that night, but his students noticed that he began every training cycle with the same lesson. "Before you learn to shoot," he would tell them, "you need to understand why you are shooting. The weapon does not have a conscience. You do. Never forget that." Tyler Nakata's leg healed within 6 months. His wrist took longer, and he wore thin scars that he never hid. He transferred to Naval Intelligence, where his skills made him one of the most valuable analysts in the Pacific Fleet. He kept his grandfather's wooden tiki figure in his breast pocket every day of his service. Rachel Graves was restored to full rank and received a classified commendation. She declined a public ceremony. Instead, she traveled to Geneva, where the Red Cross maintained records of the Korengal Clinic. There she found what she had been looking for: the name of the woman in the photograph, Fatima Nazari, age 31, mother of 3. Rachel stood before the memorial for a long time in the rain, and she said the names aloud. All 58 of them. When she finished, she placed the photograph at the base and walked away. Colonel Marcus Webb retired 6 months after the trial. When asked if the military had learned from the scandal, he said, "Institutions do not learn, people learn. And then they have to fight to make sure the institution listens." Ethan Caldwell stood at his father's kitchen table in Virginia on a Sunday morning in October, 14 months after that night on the river. Sunlight came through the window and fell across the table where his father's Navy coffee mug sat next to a plate of toast. His father stood at the counter in a flannel shirt, pouring coffee, moving with the careful deliberation of a man whose joints had earned their stiffness through 3 decades of service on steel decks in cold oceans. "You staying for dinner?" his father asked. "If you're cooking, I'll burn the steak same as always." They stood together at the kitchen window and looked out at the backyard where a maple tree had turned the color of flame. The tree had been there since before Ethan was born. His father had hung a tire swing from its lowest branch when Ethan was 4 years old, and the rope marks were still visible in the bark 34 years later. "I'm going back in," Ethan said quietly. "One more deployment. Then I'm done." His father nodded. He did not argue. He did not ask why. He understood that some men need to finish what they started before they can put it down. And he understood that his son was no longer the officer who had left for Afghanistan 14 months ago, believing without question that the chain of command was sacred and infallible. That man had been replaced by someone more complicated and more complete. Someone who understood that duty and conscience were not always the same thing, and that when they diverged, a man had to choose which voice to follow. "Whatever you decide," his father said, "I'm proud of you. Not because of what you did over there, although what you did took more courage than most people will ever understand. I'm proud because you came home still able to look at yourself in the mirror. That's rarer than any medal." Ethan put his hand on his father's shoulder. The old man's bones were thinner than he remembered. The years were doing what years do, but the man beneath those years was still the same man who had taught a small boy in this very kitchen that honor was not about following orders. It was about knowing which orders deserved to be followed. Outside, the October sun moved through the branches of the maple tree and scattered light across the lawn in patterns that shifted with the breeze. A quiet morning in Virginia, a father and a son, a pot of coffee, the ordinary beauty of a world that was still worth protecting. And somewhere in the current of a river on the other side of the earth, the water flowed over stones that remembered the weight of a boat carrying 6 people and one small device, and the truth about 312 lives that would never be forgotten. The surface was still, but beneath it, everything had changed. This one hit different. When I was putting this story together, the moment that stuck with me was Caldwell standing in front of that MRAP, looking straight at the man who signed his death warrant, and choosing truth over rank. I kept thinking, how many real soldiers have faced that exact moment and we never heard about it? The hardest enemy isn't the one shooting at you, it's the one you trusted. If this story made you think, drop a comment. I'd love to know which moment got you. Was it Holt staying behind on that rooftop? Reyes climbing that cliff with a baby on the way? Or something else entirely? Your thoughts keep these stories alive. And if you haven't yet, subscribe. The next one is already in the works, and trust me, you don't want to miss it.